A 9-year-old boy stood up for a downtrodden woman who was facing harsh humiliation from a callous bus driver. The next day, a Mercedes arrived at his school, leaving everyone astonished. On a gloomy morning, Oliver and his dad Leo stood at the bus stop. The cool breeze brought a serene hush over the bustling metropolis as they conversed. Leo, particularly focused, imparted his final guidance to his son since he couldn't accompany him to school due to a crucial job interview. "You recall what I told you, right, son? I won't be able to walk you today as I have an interview lined up. Remember to alight at the stop close to your school as we discussed, all right? It's a big city, so stay vigilant. We don't want you getting lost," Leo conveyed with a blend of concern and assurance in his tone. The 9-year-old boy, displaying a hint of independence, reassured his father with determination. "I'm 9 now, Dad. I've got this," he declared, though his smile betrayed his nerves about his first solo commute. With a proud yet emotional smile, Leo tousled his son's hair. It marked a moment of maturity, a poignant goodbye to childhood. "That's my boy," Leo said, his voice steady, masking his emotions. The bus rolled in with a deep rumble, its large metal body swallowing and spitting out passengers. "Look, the bus is here," Leo announced, helping the youngster aboard. With a tight hug, they bid farewell, promising to reunite later. Oliver boarded, paid his fare, and greeted the driver with a shy, "Good morning." Watching the bus depart, Leo's mind oscillated between interview anxieties and hopes for his son's day. Seated in a corner, Oliver settled in as if it were his own universe, peering through the window. He observed the people, streets, and gray sky, lost in childish musings. The city passed by, its colors faded, accompanied by murmurs of conversation and engines. Yet, what seemed like an ordinary day was poised to become a journey of discovery and challenge. As the bus rumbled forward, Oliver couldn't fathom the surprises looming ahead. This day was bound to steer his life down an unforeseen path, one of those rare moments that shape our character and destiny. Little did he realize that his capacity for empathy would face a trial. At a bustling station, the bus halted, welcoming a stream of passengers. Amidst them, one figure stood out conspicuously. A woman, her countenance etched with anxiety, boarded the bus. Her eyes darted restlessly, scanning the surroundings as if in perpetual search. They mirrored a tangible fear and profound worry, leaving an impact on all who caught her gaze. She seemed out of place, carrying an aura of despair that enveloped her like an invisible cloak. It was her turn to go in, but she was stopped at the turnstile because she hadn't paid the fare. With hesitation, she mumbled to the driver that she didn't have the money for the ticket. Her voice was shaking, and it was clear how stunned and embarrassed she was by the situation. The driver, who was clearly not on his best day, exploded into outrage. His words were harsh and cruel. "What do you mean you have no money? Then what the hell are you doing here? Get off, girl, get off my bus." The way he raised his voice and the brutality of his words resonated throughout the vehicle, attracting curious and embarrassed looks. The woman, visibly humiliated, began to beg, trying to explain her need to get to her destination and promising with painful sincerity that she would come back to pay. "Sir, I swear I'll come back to pay you," she pleaded. But the driver was merciless, hurling accusations and unfounded judgments at her, further aggravating her humiliating situation. "As if I'm going to let trash like you ride my bus for free, and I'm going to believe that you're going to come back and pay the fare. I know your kind very well, you're all scammers," he shouted loud and clear. Tears began to flow from the poor girl's eyes, tracing paths of despair across her face. The situation escalated, and it looked like the driver was about to use physical force to remove her from the bus. He was already getting up to grab her by the arm and throw her out of the vehicle. Oliver, who until then had watched the scene with growing discomfort and indignation, could no longer contain himself. He saw that no one else seemed willing to help. Then he stood up, his small figure and determination in his eyes. With a trembling hand, he took his lunch money, the money he knew his father had worked hard to provide for him. He was looking forward to finally buying that pizza at school he wanted so much but couldn't always afford. However, without hesitation, he abandoned his needs in favor of an act of compassion. With determined steps, he approached the driver and held out his hand with the money. "There it is. Now she can get on the bus," he said in a firm voice that contrasted with his age. With a disgusted look at the man, the boy returned to his seat, feeling a mixture of anger and pride, anger at the inhuman way the driver was treating the woman and pride at having done the right thing. His little heart was pounding, not so much at the loss of his lunch money but at the intensity of what he had just done. It was a small gesture that marked not only his day but who he was becoming, a great young man. And so the bus went on, carrying with it a story of courage and humanity in the middle of a gray morning. After little Oliver's act of courage, all the passengers were plunged into a surprised and amazed silence. The driver, speechless, was still stunned by the child's audacity. People exchanged glances with each other, murmuring about the little one's attitude. The woman, now allowed to continue her journey, went to sit beside her savior. Her eyes still bore traces of tears, but there was a new sparkle in them, a mixture of relief and gratitude. "I can't thank you enough, little buddy," she said, her voice still shaky. The boy, with a maturity that seemed beyond his years, took a handkerchief out of his backpack and offered it to her to dry her face. "It's okay. Nobody should be treated like that," he replied simply. The little boy then shared his own experience with the driver, recalling a day when his father, Leo, was 10 cents short and how they were scolded, humiliated by the heartless man, and forced to get off the bus and walk all the way home. The woman listened, her expression alternating between shock and sadness, but she insisted that she would somehow repay the boy for his kindness. While they talked, the world outside continued its course. The bus moved through the streets, passing buildings, stores, and more stops. People got on and off, each immersed in their own lives and stories, oblivious to the small act of kindness that took place inside that vehicle. The conversation between Oliver and the woman was brief but meaningful. He told her his name, and she gave him a gentle smile. Soon, the little one's stop arrived. He waved goodbye and got off the bus, walking with firm steps toward WS, the little school. The woman followed his journey through the window until he was out of sight, her heart still warmed by the little boy's selfless gesture. But as Oliver walked away, completely oblivious to the impact of his actions, the woman remained on the bus, staring at him. No one there could have guessed who she really was. She wasn't just a figure in trouble, a poor homeless woman, or a scammer as the driver had suggested. Her true identity was something that would leave everyone, especially the driver and Oliver, completely petrified by the events that would follow. And so, as the bus went on its way, each passenger took a piece of this story with them, not knowing how extraordinary it would become. The boy spent the day at school with an empty stomach, remembering the pizza he had so longed to buy. Despite his hunger, he didn't regret his attitude because he knew it was the right thing to do. When he returned home, he shared the story of the bus with his father. Leo listened attentively, and his eyes shone with a mixture of pride and emotion. "Your mother would be very proud of you," he said, his voice carrying a sweetness tinged with sadness. The man hugged his son tightly and then opened his wallet, giving him $10. "Here, son, for you to buy that slice of pizza tomorrow, and there will still be some money left for the other days," said his father. Oliver jumped for joy, hugging him in gratitude. Leo continued, "You see, buddy, good things are always rewarded." He tried to keep his tone light and hopeful, even though he knew that money was precious. However, they both had no idea how great the reward that was yet to come would be. The next day, Leo took Oliver to school. Unfortunately, the man had been told that he hadn't gotten the job as a delivery man because He was considered older than the other candidates, even though he was only 37. This made him sad and worried about how he would support his son, especially now that he needed a job more than ever. After the death of his wife, Leo was plunged into despair. His son was only 3 years old at the time, and the next 6 years were marked by struggles and uncertainties, with his father working odd jobs and dropping out of college, giving up his degree in automation engineering to devote himself entirely to raising Oliver. That morning, after dropping the boy off at school, Leo went to talk to the principal about his son's financial situation. Oliver had a scholarship at the private school, but it was about to end. Without a new scholarship or a stable job, the man feared he would no longer be able to keep his son in the school. However, while the little boy was settling down in the classroom and the man was dealing with financial matters, a very fancy Mercedes pulled up in front of the school. The gates opened, and a serene figure stepped out of the car. It was the woman from the bus the day before. The woman who got out of the luxury car was the embodiment of elegance and mystery. Her elegant figure and sophisticated clothing caught everyone's attention at the school, contrasting sharply with the desolate image she presented on the bus. She walked up to the reception desk with an aura that swung between authority and gentleness, attracting looks of admiration and curiosity. When she asked about Oliver and where he lived, there was an urgency in her voice, a need to connect with the boy who had shown her that unexpected kindness. The school, protective of its students, was obviously hesitant, as they didn't know what a stranger wanted with him. But the coincidence that Leo was there dealing with financial matters made the meeting easier. "You're lucky his father is here. Do you want to talk to him?" "Because we can't give you any private information about our students," said the employee, noting the importance of the request. "Yes, please call his father." "I'll be waiting," the woman asked with the politeness of a princess. A few minutes later, Leo, with an expression of concern and curiosity, was led up to her. When he saw her, his mind spun in disbelief. She was stunning, with a beauty that seemed to illuminate her surroundings. "Mr. Leo," announced the receptionist, "this woman said that your son helped her on the bus yesterday and wanted to talk to you." The man's heart beat faster, not only because of his surprise but also because he remembered Oliver's story about the poor woman on the bus. It didn't make sense because he thought it was a homeless woman, not the goddess he was seeing in front of him. She introduced herself, "Hello, Leo, my name is Daisy," and began narrating her interaction with the little boy, expressing her gratitude and admiration for him. Her words were like music to the father's ears, who listened attentively, each sentence boosting his paternal pride. "He was a real gentleman, offering me a handkerchief and paying for my ticket. Such a young boy with such a big heart," she said with emotion in her voice. The two left the reception and went to talk in the school garden, where the conversation flowed naturally in that quiet, welcoming space. As they walked, the woman shared more about her intention to help the little boy. She spoke about the importance of education and how moved she was by the situation of Leo and his son, as the receptionist had told her about them while she was waiting for him to arrive. "It's hard to find such kindness and courage these days. Your son is really special, and you're an incredible father for raising him like this," she said, looking into his eyes. Then Daisy made the offer that would change their lives. "I'd like to pay for your son's education. It's a small way of repaying the great kindness he has shown me." Leo was speechless. His mind struggled to process the generosity and the impact it would have on his and Oliver's future. The man tried to refuse the offer, moved by surprise. "No, I can't accept it. It's too much," he said. But the woman insisted, her determination evident in every word. "Please, Leo, I insist. You deserve it." Overwhelmed by emotion and gratitude, the father finally gave in. Tears began to stream down his face as he fell to his knees on the garden lawn. Thank you so much," he murmured over and over again, each word a sigh of relief and joy. In the middle of that garden, among the flowers and under the open sky, a simple act of kindness had unleashed a wave of generosity and hope that would transform their lives forever. The two of them sat on a bench under the shade of a tree. The atmosphere of the school enveloped them in a welcoming embrace. The woman began to tell her story, and each word revealed a reality that sounded more extraordinary than any fiction. Daisy Rohr was the daughter of a luxury car magnate, August Rohr, and the previous morning, just before sunrise, she had been the victim of an attempted kidnap. She described how, by a stroke of luck and determination, she managed to escape from the car in which she was captured, running desperately through the city. When she was already far away but still fearful of being found, with the crowd waking up to work, she got on the first bus she saw without any money or belongings. The anguish and fear were evident in her voice as she recounted the despair of that moment. Leo listened, each word painting a clearer picture of the woman in front of him. When Oliver helped her, she mentally recorded the location of the school, determined to find a way to repay his kindness. As she stepped out of the car, aided by a kind stranger, she dialed her dad, who promptly came to her rescue. The crooks were nabbed later thanks to the city's surveillance, and she was now out of harm's way. Leo found the tale both bewildering and awe-inspiring. Destiny had intricately linked his son's life with hers in a profound manner. While they conversed, Leo's son dashed to the playground and stumbled upon his father and Daisy. His face lit up with astonishment and happiness at the sight of her. "Hey, you're the girl from the bus." After hearing the entire ordeal, the boy was dumbfounded, realizing the impact of his actions in saving her. She invited them to a diner, promising the boy his long-craved pizza. Oliver leaped with joy, and she chuckled, charmed by his innocence and happiness. After their first encounter, a real friendship blossomed between them. Daisy paid frequent visits, bringing a fresh sense of kinship and happiness to Oliver and Leo. Upon learning of the man's interrupted education, she appealed to her father, who then provided him with the chance to finish his studies and work as an engineer at the posh car company. Their lives took an unexpected turn, completely transforming due to a simple act of kindness on a bus. As time passed, Leo and Daisy fell in love, and Oliver finally found the mother figure he had longed for. Together, they formed a tight-knit family bound not just by love but also by the understanding that kindness and empathy can wield extraordinary power. Their tale demonstrated the power of a simple act of kindness to ripple through lives, touching souls and reshaping fates. Thus, thanks to the compassionate gesture of a young boy aboard a bus, the trajectory of one family's existence altered, blooming into joy and affection.
Welcome to Lost Relation Chronicles.
Ben smiled as he spotted Alistair walking into the bar, heading toward their usual corner. It had been a few weeks since they'd been able to catch up, and Ben had been hoping his friend would stop by. Despite it being early and the bar still relatively empty, he seemed to have gotten lucky. Alistair had been preoccupied with something in his life and had been difficult to reach. Ben had tried calling, emailing, even stopping by Alistair's home and office, but there had been no response. He'd grown genuinely concerned, hoping whatever had been troubling Alistair was finally behind him. But as Alistair neared, Ben could see the storm in his eyes. The angry expression on his face told Ben that whatever was going on, it wasn't close to being resolved. This could be a long night. Ben stood up, eager to greet his friend, but before he could react, a sudden punch to his jaw sent him crashing to the ground. The blow was so fierce that Ben's head slammed into a nearby table as he fell. "Wah," Ben mumbled. His words slurred as he spit out a bloody tooth, struggling to make sense of what had just happened. Alistair towered over him, fists clenched, ready to strike again. "You bastard. You knew all along, didn't you? You and your wife have been making a joke out of me, haven't you? I bet you both got a good laugh at how much of a fool I've been." Dazed from the blow, Ben felt his jaw swelling rapidly, making it hard to focus. His head was spinning, and nothing Alistair said made any sense. All Ben could manage in his confused state was a weak, "Huh?" A flurry of kicks slammed into Ben's ribs and legs as Alistair continued to shout, his voice full of rage. "I'm sure it was hilarious, huh? You and her, laughing at me behind my back. All those times you hung out with me, just so she could screw around. Hey buddy, let's go to my father-in-law's cabin for the weekend. Hey buddy, Kathy got us tickets to that concert you've been dying to see, but it's 3 hours away, so we'll need to stay overnight. Any excuse to get me out of the house so she could screw that scumbag. I should have seen it coming, but I never thought you'd do this to me. I don't know what I did to make you hate me this much. But not only are you a shitty person, you're a shitty friend. The patrons in the bar had finally reacted, pulling Alistair off Ben, but not before the damage had been done. Ben, dazed and confused from the brutal blows, struggled to comprehend his friend's words, trying to piece together a reality that felt completely foreign. The bartender had already called the cops, and a cruiser arrived just in time to prevent any more violence. The ambulance took much longer to arrive, but by the time Alistair was cuffed and placed in the back of the patrol car, Ben had managed to struggle to his feet, with the help of some concerned strangers. The ambulance crew quickly assessed him, placing him on a gurney and strapping him down tightly for transport to the emergency room. Ben was barely conscious by then, his head spinning, and he passed out to the sound of the siren as the ambulance pulled away from the parking lot. To Ben, it felt like a short nap, a fleeting moment of confusion he hoped was just a bad dream. But when he slowly began to regain consciousness, the familiar hum of hospital machines and the sterile setting around him made it clear. This wasn't a dream. He was in a hospital room, surrounded by outdated medical equipment and a TV that looked like it hadn't been updated in decades. Before Ben could gather his bearings, his wife Kathy walked in, her face streaked with tears. "I'm so sorry, baby," she said, her voice breaking as she rushed to his side. "I wanted to be here when you woke up, but I had to step out to call your parents and let them know you're okay. How are you feeling?" Ben slowly sat up in the bed, trying to piece together what had happened. The medicine and rest had reduced the swelling in his face enough that his words were clearer now. Kathy sat down beside him, taking his hand gently, her eyes filled with tears. "I don't know what happened," Ben said, his voice still a bit groggy. "I'd never seen him like that before. He said something about Amanda cheating on him, and that we were helping her, that we caused it." His freakout made no sense. Kathy's tears continued to fall silently as Ben spoke, his mind still struggling to make sense of Alistair's words. "I may not have heard it correctly, but he seemed to think that he and I only did those trips so Amanda could cheat on him. That's insane. Why would he think something like that?" There was a pause in the conversation as Ben let out a deep breath. He looked over at Kathy, her head bowed as she whispered, "I'm sorry." "I don't know what you're sorry for," Ben replied, his voice rising slightly. "He's the one who hit me and came up with that crazy idea that we were helping her cheat. It sounds so dumb. Why would he think we'd do something like that? What kind of awful people would do that to someone they care about?" Ben paused, his mind still spinning. Kathy raised her head, but something in her demeanor didn't sit right with him. The way she wasn't offering her usual strong opinions or support, it felt off. Maybe he was still disoriented from the blow to the head, but he couldn't shake the feeling that something wasn't right with how she was reacting. She seemed distant, almost too quiet, in a way that Ben couldn't quite place. Kathy was clearly upset, but it felt like there was something more beneath the surface. Normally, she would have been quick to voice her thoughts, especially in a situation like this, where a close friend was involved. Yet, she seemed almost too reserved, too apologetic, for someone who should have been just as shocked by the outburst as he was. It crossed his mind that she might still be in shock from the whole incident, but a nagging sense of suspicion lingered in the air. Ben was preparing to ask Kathy what was going on when the doctor walked in with the prognosis. "Your jaw's not broken or dislocated, just bruised," he said, checking the notes on his clipboard. "As long as you don't have a headache, you should be able to leave tonight." Ben still had a dull headache from the blow, but with Kathy acting strange, he didn't want to stay in the hospital any longer. He lied to the doctor, forcing a smile and telling him he felt great so they could head home. The nurses were thorough with the paperwork, and Ben didn't get a chance to speak with Kathy privately before they left, but he hoped that once they were home, she'd feel more at ease and would finally open up to him. The drive home was eerily silent. Kathy didn't turn on the radio, and the quiet was almost suffocating. Ben kept glancing at her, but she didn't seem to notice. He wanted to ask her what was going on, but by the time they arrived home, exhaustion hit him hard, and he just wanted to sleep. He quickly changed out of his hospital gown and collapsed into bed, his body sore from the beating, and fell asleep within minutes. Kathy curled up beside him, holding him tightly as if she were afraid of losing him, but Ben couldn't shake the feeling that something was off. The next morning, after a quick shower, Ben went downstairs to join Kathy in the kitchen. His head still ached, and his body was sore, but at least his mind was clearer. Kathy was sitting at the table, sipping her coffee, but she had a distant look in her eyes, clearly lost in thought. Ben grabbed his own cup, and for a moment, they just sat there in silence. Finally, Kathy looked up, as if she hadn't realized he was there. "How are you feeling this morning?" she asked, her voice quiet but with a hint of concern. "All right," Ben replied, rubbing his temples. "I've got a bit of a headache and I'm sore all over. I think with a day of relaxing, I'll be fine. But I still can't figure out what caused Alistair to go nuts like that or say the things he did." He paused, watching her carefully as he took a sip of his coffee. "Did she say anything to you? Have you talked to her since yesterday to figure out what happened to him?" Kathy took a moment before answering, as if carefully choosing her words. "I did talk to her for a bit yesterday. She was as shocked as I was that he would do something like that to you." Ben studied Kathy closely as she spoke, sensing the carefully measured tone of her words. But there was something more, an underlying sorrow that didn't sit right with him. Her usual spark was absent, replaced by a reserved demeanor that was so unlike her. It struck him that maybe the assault had shaken her more than he'd realized, and she was struggling with it in her own way. Reaching across the table, Ben gently took her hands in his, offering a reassuring smile. "It's okay, honey. I'm fine. I'll heal." His words were met with a soft, unexpected flood of tears as Kathy wrapped her arms around him. Her genuine sorrow soaked through his shirt as they held each other tightly, exchanging whispered words of comfort and "I love yous." For a moment, Ben let himself sink into the solace of their embrace, though something still gnawed at him beneath the surface. The rest of the day passed quietly as they both called out of work, choosing to stay home and try to recover. Yet, Ben couldn't shake the nagging feeling that something more was at play here, something beyond just the physical pain from the attack. Alistair's sudden outburst and accusations, Kathy's strange distance, and the strange silence in their home all seemed off. Nothing added up, and Ben felt an urge to understand it, even if it meant confronting the difficult truths. As they stayed in separate parts of the house, Ben sat outside in the backyard, watching the wind rustle the trees and grasses, his mind turning over the events of the past day. He replayed the moment of Alistair's violent outburst in his head, trying to piece together what could have triggered it. He had known Alistair for years, and the anger that had exploded out of him seemed so unlike his friend. Alistair was never a man to fly off the handle without a reason, and yet here they were. Ben also kept returning to Kathy's words. She had never outright denied that Amanda had cheated, only expressed shock and sympathy for what had happened to him. It struck Ben as odd that she hadn't spoken more definitively about the situation. Was there something she wasn't saying? Something she was afraid to admit? The more Ben thought about it, the clearer it became that he needed to hear Alistair's side of the story directly. Confronting him again was risky, especially after the violent way their last interaction had ended, but Ben felt that it might be the only way to understand what had happened and why. He had to understand what had caused Alistair to lash out and blame him and Kathy for something that made no sense to him. It was the only way to make sense of this mess. Once he understood Alistair's perspective, Ben could sit down with Kathy to talk through their roles in all of this. He needed to know how they had become tangled in this web of accusations. What had caused Alistair to think they were disloyal? What was really going on with Kathy? Ben was determined to get to the bottom of it, even if it meant facing uncomfortable truths. In the early afternoon, Kathy mentioned to Ben that she needed to stop by her office briefly to pick up her laptop, as she would be home with him for the rest of the week and didn't want to fall behind on her work. After she left, Ben decided to take a chance and visit Alistair. He tried calling Alistair on his way to his house, but the phone kept ringing. Hoping that Alistair had been released from jail by now, Ben took an Uber to his place. If luck was on his side, maybe Alistair would be there, and they could finally figure out what had happened and hopefully repair things. However, when the Uber dropped Ben off in front of Alistair's house, his stomach sank as he noticed Kathy's car in the driveway. Instead of ringing the doorbell, Ben quietly walked around the house to the back gate, moving closer to an open window next to the kitchen. He froze when he heard Kathy talking to Ben's wife. Kathy wasn't holding back. Her voice was loud and filled with anger. What the hell happened? How did Alistair figure out what was going on? Ben's wife asked. Alistair overheard me talking about setting up a date and you covering for me. I wasn't paying attention to where I was, and he heard a conversation that he definitely shouldn't have, Kathy replied, frustration clear in her voice. Okay, but how does that explain why he attacked Ben? Ben's wife pressed. Alistair must have thought that Ben knew what was going on when he heard me say you would cover for me, and that Ben would keep him distracted while I went out. He took it as Ben being involved. I didn't find out until after the attack that he knew. He's furious. He even used his phone call from jail to tell me how much he hates me, saying he'd rather stay in jail than come back to live with me. He said every cruel thing he could think of. Kathy wanted to feel sorry for her friend, but she couldn't ignore that it was her own actions that had caused all of this. Helping someone cheat had already put her marriage at risk, and things were about to get much worse once Ben found out. Kathy knew what she had done was wrong, but she had been close to her friend and hoped that Alistair's wife would only have a brief fling and then return to being the wife Alistair wanted. Instead, Kathy had helped escalate the situation, and now she was facing the fallout of enabling destructive behavior, her own marriage on the verge of falling apart because of someone else's inability to stay faithful. I know you've got your own problems, but so do I. Once Ben figures out what happened, my marriage is going to be in serious trouble. Why would your marriage be in trouble? You didn't cheat, and they gotta have fun. He knows you'd never betray him. I'll tell him that you never did, Kathy's friend argued. Ben couldn't see it, but the tone of Kathy's voice told him everything. He could hear her closing her eyes and rubbing her forehead in frustration. You really don't get it, do you? She replied, her voice thick with exasperation. I lied to him. I helped you destroy his best friend. I helped cause his best friend to assault him. Do you really think he'll believe a single word I say now? And as for you helping me, you're the one he's going to hate the most. Do you really think he's going to listen to anything you say after all the lies you've told? But I didn't do anything wrong. I didn't cheat. You did. He has to understand that, her friend insisted. Kathy sighed deeply, her frustration palpable. It won't matter. I don't know how to fix this. And by the time Ben finds out, my marriage is probably just as over as yours is. I can't believe I was so stupid to help you. You need to understand, if I lose him, I'm done with you. I can't even look at you anymore. But you've always been a loving wife. He must know how much you love him, came the feeble reply. Yeah, that's me. A loving wife who helped her friend destroy her own marriage and caused her husband to get his ass kicked by his best friend, Kathy snapped. You really don't understand, do you? Do you think he's ever going to trust me again? Best case scenario, it would take years for him to trust me if ever. Ben had heard enough. He quietly backed away from the window and made his way back to the street. His stoic demeanor kept him calm, and his focus shifted toward figuring out the next steps. As he waited for the Uber to arrive, the weight of the situation settled in. He needed to start making things right, but first, he had to get all the facts. It was time to visit a friend. The desk sergeant and detectives were clearly baffled, but after years of dealing with the unpredictable nature of police work, they merely shrugged when Ben announced he was paying for Alistair's bail. They exchanged smirks as Alistair's confusion turned to surprise upon realizing Ben was the one who had gotten him out, and they couldn't help but laugh when Ben told Alistair to keep quiet until he was told otherwise. Still puzzled, Alistair followed Ben out to the Uber and got in without a word. Once in the car, Ben gave the driver the address, and they rode in silence until they arrived at the bar, the scene of the chaos. The same bartender was working, and his anxious expression revealed his concern that another outburst might occur. Ben quickly put him at ease by asking for a bottle of Glenmorangie Signet, 2 glasses, and for them to be left alone while he and Alistair took a booth in the corner. Ben poured generous amounts of whiskey into both glasses, sliding one toward Alistair. They clinked their glasses together with a silent, bitter toast before downing the drinks. Ben watched his friend carefully, then spoke. I had no idea about the setup. I just wanted to hang out and have a good time with you. They used our friendship against you. They knew I wouldn't go along with their plan. So they kept me out of the loop and ran their bullshit behind my back. Alistair studied Ben for a moment. The two had been close for so long that Alistair could always tell when Ben was being sincere, and it was clear now that he was. With the initial anger fading and the time in jail giving him a moment to cool off, Alistair was starting to think more clearly, or at least more rationally about what Ben had told him. You know, Alistair muttered, his voice thick with bitterness, she tore my heart out, and your wife helped her do it. I gave everything I had to our marriage, and it was all for nothing because she'd rather go out and get some other guy's Johnny than stay with me. Ben refilled their glasses, his gaze never leaving Alistair as his friend continued to vent his anger and frustration. The whiskey helped loosen the tension between them, and as Alistair's verbal barrage slowed, Ben sat back and listened quietly. When the storm of emotions finally started to subside, Alistair took a deep breath and turned toward Ben, his expression remorseful. I probably should have talked to you first, Alistair admitted, his voice softer now, but I couldn't help it. When I found out my marriage and my friendship with you were both over, I just lost control. As much as her being a 304 killed me, the thought of you backstabbing me hurt worse. The cheating is bad enough, but thinking you were laughing at me while she was doing it was unbearable. I'm sorry. Ben grinned, taking a slow sip of his whiskey. That's okay. I probably deserved it for banging your sister during Christmas break junior year. But how did you find out she was cheating? Alistair shook his head with a rueful smile. It was the dumbest thing, man. I had a feeling something was off with my marriage, so I started pulling back from everyone. I came to the conclusion that she must be cheating, so I was about to hire a PI. But while I was looking up investigators at work, my phone started showing me video and audio from our Ring camera. She triggered the motion sensor when she picked up an Amazon package and, while talking on the phone, was setting up a meeting with another guy. She even mentioned you and Kathy helping her out, like you guys had been in on it the whole time. It sounded like you were part of the whole thing. Ben stared at his friend in disbelief. 2 marriages gone because 1304 couldn't keep her legs closed and forgot about a camera. Alistair exhaled in frustration. So, Kathy cheated too? I hadn't even considered it, but it makes sense she'd be doing the same thing, covering for her. Ben shook his head. Actually, I'm pretty convinced Kathy didn't cheat. I overheard her talking earlier, and I'm sure she didn't step out on Alistair. Alistair raised an eyebrow. His curiosity piqued. So, if she didn't cheat, why are you getting rid of her? It would almost be easier to forgive her if she had slept with someone else. But it's worse than that, Ben said, frustration in his voice. The problem isn't just the cheating, it's the trust. She lied to me over and over about everything. About her actions, about your situation, and then used our friendship to cover it up. She made me an unwilling participant in deceiving you. How am I supposed to stay in a marriage with someone I can't trust anymore, and who my best friend now hates? Alistair paused, thinking about what Ben said. You can rebuild trust. Maybe not mine, after what she did, but Kathy does love you. Are you really sure this is the end? Ben shook his head. I think so. Trust, once broken, isn't something that can ever go back to being as strong as it was. People might forgive, but they never forget. I'm not going to waste my life holding on to this, hoping that in a few years, it'll be a distant memory. She knew exactly what she was doing. There's nothing left to say that will fix this. It's time for me to walk away and start fresh. Alistair looked at Ben with a mix of admiration and envy. Even through all of this, you stay so composed. You'll have a clean break with an amicable divorce, and you'll both be on good terms. Meanwhile, I'm trying to figure out which Mexican brothel rents out 304s for donkey shows so I can find her a job that matches her skill set and lower my alimony payments. I'm honestly in awe of how you just see life for what it is. You choose your path, and you just keep moving forward. Ben chuckled at Alistair's dark humor. As much as it felt like his world was falling apart, a part of him knew he'd be okay in the end. He'd head home, talk to Kathy, and while she'd probably cry and beg for counseling, he already knew how it would play out. She'd beg, promise things would change, but deep down, he knew he couldn't accept what she had done. There was no way he could just let it go. The trust was broken beyond repair, and Kathy knew it too. He could feel that the chapter of his marriage to her had reached its end. It was time to move forward, to pick a new direction, and to see what else was out there for him. Dear listeners, please share your thoughts in the comments section below, and don't forget to like, share, and subscribe. Welcome back, and thank you for tuning into Cheating Tales Lab. We appreciate every single one of you. We'd love to know, what part of the world are you watching from right now? Let us know in the comments. Now, let's dive into today's story. The metallic clang of surgical instruments echoed through Operating Room 3 at Metropolitan General Hospital. Dr. Abraham Wilkins stood over his patient, his gloved hands steady as they had been for the past 23 years of performing cardiothoracic surgeries. BP's dropping, Dr. Wilkins, the anesthesiologist announced. Abraham's eyes remained fixed on the exposed heart before him. Increase the dopamine drip. Let's get that pressure up. His movements were precise, calculated, a stark contrast to the chaos churning inside his mind. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield, assisting on the other side of the table, noticed the slight tension in his shoulders. She had worked alongside Abraham long enough to read the subtle signs others might miss. 3 hours later, as they scrubbed out, Lourdes broke the silence. That was close in there. We got it done, Abraham replied, methodically washing his hands. Your hands were steady as always, Abe, but your mind was somewhere else. Lourdes dried her hands, studying his reflection in the steel sink. Coffee. In the doctor's lounge, Abraham stared into his cup of black coffee, the events from last night's parent-teacher conference replaying in his mind. 24 hours earlier, The hallways of Westbrook Academy buzzed with activity as parents moved from classroom to classroom. Abraham adjusted his tie, having come straight from the hospital. Rebecca should have been there, but another yoga class had taken priority. Pete Wiggins's classroom smelled of chalk dust and teenage anxiety. The AP chemistry teacher's desk was cluttered with graded papers and half-empty coffee cups. Posters of the periodic table and molecular structures decorated the walls. Dr. Wilkins. Pete's handshake was firm, his smile too familiar. Caitlin's one of our brightest students. She definitely inherited those brains from somewhere. Thank you. Rebecca and I are proud of her dedication. Pete's expression shifted slightly at Rebecca's name. Ah yes, Mrs. Wilkins mentioned during book club that she's been helping Caitlin with her chemistry studies. Abraham's physician's intuition, honed by decades of reading subtle symptoms, picked up on something in Pete's tone. Book club? Oh yes. Pete shuffled some papers on his desk. The one that meets during my free periods on Thursdays. Your wife's quite the literature enthusiast. Rebecca had told him she attended yoga classes on Thursdays. Back in the present, Lourdes' voice cut through his thoughts. Earth to Abraham. Sorry. He set down his coffee. Just thinking about something Pete Wiggins said at parent-teacher conferences. The chemistry teacher Caitlin's always talking about? The same. Abraham leaned back, his surgical scrubs crinkling. Did you know Rebecca's apparently in a book club that meets during his free periods? I thought she did yoga on Thursdays. So did I. The silence between them spoke volumes. Clark Sheridan's office was exactly what you'd expect from a former FBI agent turned private investigator. Functional, organized, and completely unremarkable. The man himself matched his surroundings. Mid-50s, gray at the temples, wearing a suit that was practical rather than fashionable. Tell me everything, Clark said, his notebook open and pen poised. Abraham recounted the inconsistencies he'd noticed. Rebecca's changing schedules, the book club that conflicted with supposed yoga classes, Pete Wiggins's oddly intimate knowledge of his wife's activities. Clark made notes in precise, economical strokes. How long has your daughter been at Westbrook? Since freshman year. 3 years now. And when did the yoga classes start? Abraham frowned. Around the same time. Clark nodded, his expression neutral. I'll need a few days to establish surveillance and basic background checks. In the meantime, maintain your normal routine. Don't give any indication that you suspect anything. A week later, Clark's preliminary report lay on Abraham's desk at the hospital. Rebecca's yoga studio had no record of her membership. The book club she claimed to attend didn't exist, at least not officially. Dr. Wilkins? His office door opened, revealing Janet, one of the nurses. Your 3 o'clock valve replacement was canceled. The patient's blood work wasn't optimal. Abraham nodded, quickly sliding the report into his drawer. Thank you, Janet. Could you ask Dr. Mansfield to stop by when she has a moment? Later that afternoon, Lourdes perched on the edge of his office chair, reading Clark's findings. Jesus, Abe. There's more. He handed her a business card. Wendy Bartlett. The school librarian reached out to Clark yesterday. What did she say? She's been keeping records. Security footage, sign-in sheets, patterns of behavior. Apparently, Pete has a history of close relationships with students' mothers. Lourdes set down the report. Have you talked to Rebecca? Not yet. Clark's gathering more evidence. He says I need to be strategic about this. What about Caitlin? Abraham's face tightened. That's complicated. There are some medical markers in her blood work that never quite made sense. I've always dismissed it, but now, you think. I don't know what to think anymore. The next week passed in a blur of surgeries, surveillance updates, and sleepless nights. Clark's investigation produced a steady stream of evidence. Credit card statements showing purchases at times and places that contradicted Rebecca's stories, security footage from Westbrook Academy showing her car in the parking lot during Pete's free periods, and finally, the damning testimony from Wendy Bartlett. The school librarian sat across from Abraham in Clark's office, her hands clasped tightly in her lap. I should have said something sooner, but without proof. Tell him what you saw last Thursday, Clark prompted. Wendy pulled out her phone, fingers trembling slightly as she pulled up a video. I stay late most days, cataloging new acquisitions. My office overlooks the science wing. The footage was grainy but clear enough. Rebecca, entering Pete's classroom after hours. The lights dimming. No one emerging for over an hour. There's more, Clark said quietly. Going back 3 years. Abraham's world tilted on its axis. 3 years. Since Caitlin started at Westbrook, the DNA test results arrived on a Tuesday. Abraham stared at the numbers and percentages that demolished 18 years of fatherhood. His office at Metropolitan General had never felt more sterile, more cold. The drive home that evening was a blur. He barely registered the familiar streets of their upscale neighborhood, the manicured lawns of Oakwood, or the Tudor-style home he had purchased when Caitlin was born. All he could see were the numbers on that report. Rebecca's car was in the driveway. Caitlin's debate practice wouldn't end for another hour. Or so he thought. He found Rebecca in the kitchen, chopping vegetables for dinner with practiced precision. She looked up, smiling. "You're home early. Rough day?" "You could say that." His voice sounded strange to his own ears. "We need to talk, Rebecca." She set down the knife. "What's wrong? Where were you last Thursday afternoon?" "Yoga class, you know that." "Really?" "Because I have security footage of you entering Pete Wiggins's classroom at 3:45 p.m. The color drained from Rebecca's face. "Abe, 3 years, Rebecca. 3 years of lies. It's not what you think. Don't." His hand slammed down on the counter, making the knife rattle. "Don't you dare try to explain this away. I have everything. The false yoga classes, the non-existent book club, the money you've been funneling to him. You had me investigated?" Her shock turned to anger. "How dare you? How dare I? How dare you? 18 years of marriage, Rebecca. 18 years, and Caitlin isn't even mine." The sound of a backpack hitting the floor made them both turn. Caitlin stood in the doorway, her debate team uniform still pristine, her face a mask of horror. "Practice ended early," she whispered. "Caitlin, honey," Rebecca started. "Get out," Abraham said quietly. "What?" Both Rebecca and Caitlin spoke simultaneously. "Get out of my house, Rebecca. Now." Caitlin stepped between them. "You can't kick her out. This is her home too." "Caitlin, please." Rebecca reached for her daughter. "No." Caitlin's voice rose. "How dare you kick Mom out of the house, just over a tiny affair?" Abraham's laugh was hollow. "A tiny affair? With your teacher? The man who, as it turns out, is your biological father." The silence that followed was deafening. "You're lying," Caitlin whispered. Abraham walked to his office, retrieved the DNA test results, and returned. He handed them to Caitlin with surgical precision. "I'm a doctor, Caitlin. These numbers don't lie." Tears streamed down Caitlin's face as she read. "This can't be true. Ask your mother." Rebecca's silence was answer enough. "If you won't let her back in the house," Caitlin crumpled the papers, "you're no longer my dad." "I never was." The words tasted like ash in his mouth. "Go pack your things, both of you. I want you out tonight." "Abe, please," Rebecca tried one last time. "We can talk about this." "There's nothing to talk about. You can contact my lawyer tomorrow." He turned away, his voice clinical, detached. "You know what? Go and live with your mom on the streets. Get out from here." The sound of their footsteps on the stairs, of drawers being yanked open and clothes being stuffed into bags, of muffled sobs and angry whispers, filled the house. Abraham stood in the kitchen, surrounded by the half-chopped vegetables and shattered remnants of his life. Later that night, after they had gone, Abraham sat in his dark office at home. The house echoed with emptiness. On his desk, family photos seemed to mock him, vacation snapshots, graduation ceremonies, holiday portraits. 18 years of memories, all built on lies. His phone buzzed. A text from Lourdes. "Do you need company?" He stared at the message for a long moment before responding. "Not tonight. Surgery at 7 a.m. tomorrow." Setting the phone down, Abraham looked at the DNA test results one last time before filing them away. Tomorrow, he would call Barry Hahn and start the divorce proceedings. Tomorrow, he would begin dismantling the life he thought he had. But tonight, in the darkness of his office, Dr. Abraham Wilkins allowed himself to feel the full weight of betrayal. The steady hands that had saved countless lives trembled as he poured himself a drink, and for the first time in decades, he wept. Barry Hahn's corner office overlooked the city courthouse, a view he'd earned through 20 years of prosecuting the worst kinds of betrayal. The former prosecutor studied the DNA test results and surveillance photos spread across his mahogany desk. "They're not wasting any time," Barry said, sliding a legal notice across to Abraham. "Marcy King filed a divorce petition this morning. She's demanding immediate spousal support and exclusive use of the house." Abraham's fingers tightened on his coffee cup. "The house I bought before we were married? Marcy's aggressive, but she's not subtle." Barry leaned back, his chair creaking. "She's built her career bleeding men like you dry. Successful professionals who can't afford public scandal. I won't be blackmailed." "Good." Barry pulled out a thick folder. "Because our forensic accountant found something interesting in your joint accounts." The numbers told a story more sordid than even Abraham had imagined. Regular transfers to an offshore account, carefully disguised as charitable donations. Credit card statements showing expensive gifts. Hotel charges in neighboring cities. "How much?" Abraham asked. "Close to $500,000 over the past 3 years." Barry highlighted several transactions. Most of it coincides with Pete Wiggins's known gambling debts. A knock interrupted them. Barry's secretary entered with another stack of documents. "The subpoenas for Westbrook Academy's records just came through." "Perfect." Barry turned to Abraham. "Ready to go on offense?" "What's our strategy?" "We hit them with everything. Financial fraud, breach of fiduciary duty, alienation of affection. And once we expose Pete's gambling debts, Rebecca's lawyer will have to shift from offense to damage control." Abraham stared out at the courthouse. "And Caitlin?" Barry's expression softened slightly. "She's 17, almost legally an adult. The courts will consider her preference, but given the circumstances, I don't want her money. Or her time." Abraham stood. "I just want the truth on record." Across town, in Marcy King's significantly more modern office, Rebecca sat with perfect posture, her designer handbag clutched like a shield. "He's not playing fair," Rebecca insisted. "Using private investigators, DNA tests, it's harassment." Marcy, a sharp-featured woman in her 50s, typed rapidly on her laptop. "It's legal discovery, and he's within his rights. What concerns me are these financial transfers. I was helping a friend in need." "A friend who happened to be having an affair with you?" Marcy's fingers stopped moving. "A friend who's the biological father of your daughter?" Rebecca's composure cracked slightly. "You don't understand." "No, you don't understand." Marcy closed her laptop. "Your husband's lawyer was a prosecutor. He's building a criminal case, not just a divorce filing. Those transfers weren't just betrayal. They were fraud. But the prenup. The prenup becomes void if criminal activity is proven." Marcy's voice hardened. "Tell me everything about Pete's gambling. Now." Headmaster Wilson Daly's office at Westbrook Academy radiated old-world privilege. Oak paneling, leather chairs, and generations of alumni photographs created an atmosphere of unshakable tradition. But today, that tradition was trembling. "This can't go public," Wilson insisted, his bow tie slightly askew. The reputation of the school?" Wendy Bartlett's voice shook with anger. "What about the reputation of every student whose mother Pete Wiggins targeted?" "Now, Ms. Bartlett, I have documentation going back 3 years." Wendy placed a USB drive on his desk. "Security footage, email correspondence, complaints from other staff members that were lost in the system." Wilson's face reddened. "Those files are school property, and I've already shared copies with Jamie Goldstein at the Herald." The name of the investigative reporter made Wilson collapse back into his chair. "You didn't." "She's running the story next week." Wendy stood. "Unless?" "Unless? Unless you do the right thing. Fire Pete. Launch a formal investigation. Make this right." Before Wilson could respond, his phone buzzed. His secretary's voice trembled. "Sir, there are police officers here with a warrant. And a news crew in the parking lot." Jamie Goldstein stood in front of the school's iconic brick facade, her red hair bright against the gathering storm clouds. Her cameraman adjusted the frame as she reviewed her notes. "Westbrook Academy, The prestigious private school that has educated the city's elite for over a century faces allegations of misconduct and cover-ups. Multiple sources within the school have provided evidence of inappropriate relationships between a teacher and students' mothers, along with financial irregularities involving hundreds of thousands of dollars. Parents gathered at the edges of the shot, phones recording, whispers spreading like wildfire. A police car pulled up, and two detectives emerged with boxes of seized documents. Inside, Pete Wiggins sat in the chemistry lab for the last time, watching through the window as his career imploded. His phone buzzed with a text from Rebecca. They know about the money. All of it. His hands shook as he opened his desk drawer, pulling out a letter of resignation he'd prepared weeks ago. Too late now. The police would find the gambling debts, the loans, the threats from bookies. And Rebecca would tell them everything to save herself. The lab door opened. Detective Sarah Chin entered, her badge glinting. Mr. Wiggins? We need to talk about some financial transactions. In the library, Wendy Bartlett watched the scene unfold while copying more files. Other teachers began coming forward, the school counselor with notes from concerned students, the janitor with after-hours access logs, the business office staff with questioned expense reports. Ms. Bartlett? A junior reporter from the Herald approached. Can you tell us how long you've been documenting these incidents? Since the first red flag, Wendy looked at the growing crowd outside. Sometimes doing the right thing means burning everything down and starting over. The modest two-bedroom apartment felt like a prison to Rebecca. No housekeeper, no garden service, no country club membership. Just beige walls and IKEA furniture. We can't live like this, she told Caitlin, who sat curled on the second-hand couch. Your father is destroying us. He's not my father. Caitlin's voice was bitter. You made sure of that. Don't take that tone with me. Rebecca paced the small living room. Everything I did was for us. And now he's trying to ruin everything. My reputation, my future, your future. What about Pete? Caitlin's question hung in the air. Pete's. Rebecca's voice trailed off. Pete's dealing with his own problems. You mean his gambling debts? The ones you paid with Dad's, with Abraham's money? Rebecca spun to face her daughter. How did you? It's all over school. Caitlin stood, her face flushed. Everyone knows. Do you have any idea what it's like there now? My teacher, my biological father, was sleeping with students' mothers and stealing their money. It wasn't stealing. It was. Stop lying. Caitlin grabbed her phone. At least Abraham told me the truth, even when it hurt. Rebecca's expression hardened. Truth? You want truth? Fine. He's trying to destroy us, so we'll destroy him first. She pulled out a notebook. I've kept records of every patient he's lost, every complication in surgery. By the time I'm done, no one will trust him with a paper cut, let alone heart surgery. You're talking about ruining his career. Caitlin's voice shook. People could die if they're afraid to let him operate. He should have thought of that before he threw us out. Before he discovered your lies, you mean? Rebecca ignored her daughter's comment, already typing on her laptop. I've contacted every medical board in the state. Anonymous complaints about drinking before surgery, prescribing unnecessary medications, inappropriate behavior with nurses. None of that is true. It doesn't have to be true. Rebecca's smile was cold. It just has to be loud enough, constant enough, to create doubt. Unless what? Unless he agrees to reinstate us in his will. Give us what we deserve. At Metropolitan General, Abraham sat in Chief of Surgery Troy Calderon's office, surrounded by his colleagues. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield read through the latest batch of complaints. This is ridiculous, Lourdes said. Everyone knows you're the most careful surgeon on staff. You won't even take aspirin during call weeks. Troy Calderon, a commanding presence even seated, nodded. Our lawyers are already preparing responses. Every case Rebecca cited has complete documentation showing standard of care was not just met but exceeded, but the damage is already spreading. Abraham gestured to his significantly lighter surgery schedule. Patients are requesting other surgeons, not your regular patients. Lourdes set down the complaints, not the ones who know you. And the staff is behind you completely. Every nurse, every tech, every resident. They're all willing to sign statements supporting you. Salvatore Bernard, the hospital's lead counsel, entered with a stack of papers. We've got enough for a defamation suit. Multiple counts, provable damages, clear malicious intent. Do it, Abraham said quietly. No settlements, no deals. It'll be public, Troy warned. Messy. Everything's already public. Abraham stood. I've lost my wife, my daughter, and my home. I won't lose my integrity too. Later that night, Abraham sat in his office, reviewing surgical notes for the few cases that remained on his schedule. His phone buzzed with a text from an unknown number. It's Caitlin. Mom's lost it. She's going to destroy everything you've built unless you give her what she wants. I'm sorry. For everything. Abraham stared at the message for a long time before deleting it. Through his window, he could see the lights of the hospital chapel where he'd prayed the day Caitlin was born. The day he'd promised to always protect her, always love her. Some promises, he realized, were broken long before they were made. The next morning, Rebecca received a letter from Abraham's lawyers, not offering surrender or compromise, but serving notice of a defamation suit backed by the full power of Metropolitan General Hospital. As she read the detailed documentation dismantling each of her false complaints, her phone buzzed with news that would shatter what remained of her plans. Pete Wiggins had taken a deal with prosecutors. He would testify about everything, the affair, the money, the other mothers, in exchange for leniency. In his hospital office, Abraham prepared for his first surgery of the day, his hands steady as ever. Outside, life went on. Patients needed him, residents needed teaching, and the truth, slowly but surely, was emerging from the wreckage of lies. Dr. Lourdes Mansfield watched him scrub in, noting the straight line of his shoulders, the calm focus in his eyes. Ready? Always. Abraham stepped into the OR, leaving the chaos of his personal life outside those sterile doors. Here, in this room, there was only the work, the healing, the truth of what his hands could do. And for now, that was enough. The courthouse's oak-paneled courtroom sat silent as Judge Eleanor Martinez reviewed the final pieces of evidence. Barry Hahn stood confidently at the plaintiff's table, while Rebecca shifted uncomfortably beside Marcy King, her designer outfit now months out of style. Your Honor, Barry's voice carried easily through the chamber, we'd like to present evidence of additional financial fraud perpetrated by Mrs. Wilkins and Mr. Wiggins. The projector hummed to life, displaying spreadsheets and bank statements on the courtroom screen. These documents show a pattern of systematic fraud targeting wealthy parents at Westbrook Academy, Barry continued. Mrs. Wilkins didn't just assist Mr. Wiggins with his gambling debts. They worked together to scam other families. Marcy King rose to object, but Rebecca grabbed her arm, shaking her head. Her face had gone pale. Judge Martinez leaned forward. Mrs. Wilkins, do you wish to respond to these allegations? Rebecca's voice trembled. No, Your Honor. Very well. The judge removed her reading glasses. Based on the overwhelming evidence presented, including proof of financial fraud, infidelity, and deliberate deception regarding paternity, I am granting Dr. Wilkins's petition for divorce. She paused, scanning the courtroom. Furthermore, given Mrs. Wilkins's criminal conduct, I am awarding Dr. Wilkins full ownership of all marital assets. The prenuptial agreement is void due to proven criminal activity. Rebecca slumped in her chair as Judge Martinez continued. Mrs. Wilkins, I am referring this matter to the District Attorney's Office for criminal prosecution. Mr. Hahn has provided substantial evidence of wire fraud, theft by deception, and conspiracy. In the gallery, Detective Sarah Chan made notes while two uniformed officers moved closer to the courtroom doors. Your Honor, Marcy began. Your client perpetrated a years-long fraud that went far beyond a simple affair. Judge Martinez's voice hardened. She manipulated not only her husband, but an entire school community. The court cannot ignore such calculated deception. As Rebecca was led away in handcuffs, Abraham sat quietly, his expression unreadable. Barry gathered his papers, speaking softly to his client. Pete Wiggins took a plea deal this morning, Barry said. He's testifying against Rebecca and the gambling syndicate he was involved with. They're looking at serious time. Abraham nodded. And Caitlin? She's 18 now. Legally an adult. Barry hesitated. She's been trying to contact your office. I know. Abraham stood, straightening his tie. Some bridges can't be rebuilt. Outside the courthouse, reporters clustered around Jamie Goldstein as she delivered her latest update. The divorce proceedings revealed a complex web of deception involving financial fraud at Westbrook Academy. Multiple families have come forward claiming they were targeted by Mr. Wiggins and Mrs. Wilkins. Sources say criminal indictments are pending. 6 months later, Abraham stood in Metropolitan General's teaching amphitheater, demonstrating a new valve replacement technique to a group of residents. His hands moved with practiced precision over the surgical simulator. The key is maintaining steady pressure while you secure the sutures, he explained. 1 millimeter's difference can mean the difference between success and failure. In the front row, Dr. Lourdes Mansfield watched with a slight smile. Besides her sat a woman she'd invited to observe, Dr. Letitia Roman, the hospital's new head of pediatric surgery. After the demonstration, Lourdes made the introduction. Abe, meet Dr. Roman. She's revolutionizing our pediatric cardiac program. Letitia's handshake was firm, her dark eyes direct. That was an impressive demonstration, Dr. Wilkins. Though I prefer working with smaller vessels in my tiny patients. Please call me Abraham. He noticed the plain gold band on her right hand, a widow's ring. I'd love to hear about your techniques. Maybe over coffee. Later, in the hospital cafeteria, their conversation flowed naturally from surgical procedures to personal histories. Military service took Jason from me 3 years ago, Letitia said, stirring her coffee. Left me with 2 boys and a lot of questions about what family really means. Abraham nodded. I thought I knew what family meant. 18 years of marriage taught me otherwise. I heard about the scandal. Letitia's voice was gentle but direct. Must have been hard, having your personal life splashed across the headlines. The betrayal was worse than the publicity. Abraham studied his cup. Finding out my daughter, that Caitlin wasn't mine. That everything I'd built was based on lies. Biology isn't everything. Letitia set down her cup. My boys are adopted. Jason and I couldn't have children, but they're ours in every way that matters. Their conversation continued through afternoon rounds, where Abraham watched Letitia with her young patients. Her compassion was evident, but so was her strength. She didn't sugarcoat difficult news, but she delivered it with genuine empathy. You're good with them? He commented as they left the pediatric ward. Children deserve honesty, she replied, even when it's hard. Maybe especially then. Over the following months, their professional collaboration grew into friendship. They consulted on complex cases, combining their expertise to save lives that might have been lost to either of them working alone. Dr. Mansfield watched their growing connection with satisfaction. During a particularly challenging surgery they performed together, she observed their seamless teamwork from the gallery. They move like they can read each other's minds, a resident whispered. Lourdes smiled. That's what happens when trust and respect come before everything else. 3 years passed. Abraham stood at the window of his new office at Metropolitan General, now decorated with photos of himself and Letitia at medical conferences, their blended family at graduation ceremonies, and most recently, their wedding day. A knock at the door interrupted his thoughts. Troy Calderon entered, holding a letter. Westbrook Academy's new board wants you as a trustee, Troy said. They're implementing ethical oversight guidelines, want your input given. Everything that happened, Abraham took the letter. Interesting timing. Pete Wiggins gets out next month. And Rebecca? 2 more years, with restitution payments. Abraham set the letter down. Caitlin sent another letter last week. Wanting to meet. Troy raised an eyebrow. And some chapters need to stay closed. Abraham's phone buzzed. A text from Letitia about their foundation's latest pediatric case. Others are just beginning. Later that evening, Abraham and Letitia sat in their home office, reviewing applications for their children's medical foundation. Photos of her sons, now his stepsons, playing baseball decorated the walls alongside their medical degrees. Connor got accepted to medical school. Letitia mentioned, sorting through papers. He wants to be a cardiac surgeon, like his stepdad. Abraham smiled. As long as he knows it's his choice. No expectations, unlike some people we know. Her tone was gentle. "I got a letter from Westbrook Academy today," he said. "They want help preventing future scandals. Are you going to accept?" Abraham considered the question. "Maybe it's time. Use what happened to protect others." "You're not the same man who lost everything 3 years ago," Letitia observed. "You're stronger." "We're stronger," he corrected. "This foundation, our family, our work, it's all built on truth this time." The next morning, Abraham sat down to write his response to Westbrook Academy. Through his office window, he could see the hospital chapel where he'd once prayed over a daughter he thought was his. Now he said a different kind of prayer, one of gratitude for second chances and real love. As he finished the letter accepting the trustee position, his office phone rang. Another emergency case, another life to save. He grabbed his coat, heading for or where Letitia would already be scrubbing in. They worked seamlessly together now, their personal and professional lives intertwined in ways he'd never imagined possible during those dark days 3 years ago. In the surgical lounge after the successful operation, Abraham found a letter in his locker, the latest from Caitlin. Unlike the others, this one would remain unopened. Some betrayals broke you, but others broke you free. He'd finally learned the difference. That evening, at home with Letitia and their sons, Abraham watched his new family share stories around the dinner table. Connor talked excitedly about medical school plans while his younger brother debated the merits of different residency programs. "You're smiling," Letitia observed quietly. "Just thinking about how loss can lead to finding something real," he replied. "Something true." Later, as they prepared for bed, Letitia asked, "Any regrets?" "About Caitlin?" Abraham considered the question carefully. "I regret that she lost her way, that Rebecca's lies cost her a father. But I can't regret moving forward. Sometimes healing means accepting that not every broken thing can be fixed. But some broken things come back stronger," Letitia added, squeezing his hand. Abraham nodded, thinking of their foundation's work, their blended family, their shared mission of healing. Everything they'd built together was based on choice, on truth, on mutual respect, not obligation or deception. "Some betrayals break you," he said, echoing words he'd repeat many times in the years to come. "And others break you free. The key is knowing the difference." Epilogue. 10 years later. The autumn wind scattered leaves across the grounds of Metropolitan General Hospital's new pediatric wing. The brass plaque beside the entrance read, "The Wilkins Roman Foundation Center for Children's Cardiac Care." Inside, Dr. Abraham Wilkins, now 58, stood before a gathered crowd at the center's 10th anniversary celebration. A decade ago, he began, his silver hair catching the light. This foundation was born from a belief that every broken heart deserves a chance to heal, whether it's physical or emotional. In the front row, Dr. Letitia Roman Wilkins squeezed her husband's hand. Their years together had only deepened the connection that began in those dark days after his divorce. Her sons, now accomplished doctors themselves, sat beside her. Connor having followed Abraham into cardiothoracic surgery, while Marcus had chosen pediatric oncology. "Through this center," Abraham continued, "we've treated over 10,000 children who couldn't afford specialized cardiac care. But today, I want to share a different kind of story about healing." The room fell silent as Abraham pulled out a worn envelope. 3 months ago, I received this letter from the Rockland Women's Correctional Facility. It was from my ex-wife, Rebecca. A murmur rippled through the audience. Even after a decade, the scandal remained part of the hospital's lore. The letter had arrived on a Tuesday morning. "Dear Abraham, I'm writing this from my prison cell, where I've spent the last 7 years contemplating the magnitude of my betrayal. The doctors say my cancer is terminal, 3 months, maybe 4. Before I go, I need you to know the truth about everything. The money we stole from Westbrook parents didn't just go to Pete's gambling debts. We were running a sophisticated investment scam, targeting wealthy families through their children's education. Pete would identify vulnerable mothers during parent-teacher conferences, and I would befriend them at school functions. We destroyed lives, Abraham, not just yours. Pete committed suicide in his cell last year. He couldn't live with what we'd done, but I need to live long enough to make amends. I've provided the FBI with details about every scam, every victim. Some of the money might be recoverable. Caitlin visits me sometimes. She's a different person now, harder, more cynical. The trust fund you set up for her education remains untouched. She says she doesn't deserve it. Your kindness in providing for her education, despite everything, shames me more than my prison sentence. I don't expect forgiveness. I don't deserve it. But I needed you to know that losing you, losing the life we had, wasn't worth any amount of money or excitement. The woman I was then seems like a stranger now. The nurses here know about your foundation. They say you and Letitia are doing amazing work. I'm glad you found happiness. It proves what I learned too late, that love built on truth lasts, while lies poison everything they touch. I'm sorry, Abraham, for everything. Rebecca. Back in the present, Abraham folded the letter carefully. Rebecca passed away last month. In her final act, she helped recover millions in stolen funds, which her victims' families are finally receiving. In the audience, Wendy Bartlett, now Westbrook Academy's superintendent, dabbed at her eyes. The scandal had eventually led to her promotion and the school's complete reformation. Under her leadership, Westbrook had become a model of ethical education. But this story isn't about revenge or justice, Abraham continued. It's about the choices we make after betrayal. Do we let it break us, or do we let it break us free? Dr. Lourdes Mansfield, retired but still sharp as ever, smiled knowingly. She had watched Abraham rebuild his life, had introduced him to Letitia, had seen their love grow from shared pain into something beautiful. Through this foundation, we've chosen to transform pain into purpose. Every child we save, every family we help, is a testament to the power of starting over. The screen behind him displayed photos of their work. Children before and after surgery, families reunited, lives transformed. Among them was a recent picture that caught everyone's attention. A young woman in a white coat, her features hauntingly familiar. My daughter Caitlin, Abraham's voice softened, graduated from medical school last month. She's beginning her residency in psychiatry, specializing in helping children cope with family trauma. We're rebuilding, slowly. On honest ground this time. The revelation caused another stir. It was the first time he had publicly acknowledged renewed contact with his former daughter. She works at a clinic across town, he continued. Different hospital, different specialty. We see each other at medical conferences sometimes. Small steps, but real ones. Letitia stood, joining her husband at the podium. Life isn't about the families we're born into or the lies we're told, she added. It's about the truths we choose to live by. The ceremony continued, but the story wasn't finished. Later that evening, in their home office, Abraham and Letitia reviewed files of new cases while their grandchildren played in the next room. Connor's twins and Marcus's daughter filled the house with the kind of honest laughter that only children could provide. Did you tell them about the other letter? Letitia asked softly. Abraham nodded, pulling out another envelope. This one was from Pete Wiggins, written days before his death. Dr. Wilkins, by the time you read this, I'll be gone. The guilt finally won. Prison gives you too much time to think about your sins. I want you to know that Caitlin was the only good thing that came from all our deceptions. She may be my biological daughter, but you were her real father in every way that mattered. The way you provided for her education, even after everything we did. It showed me what true fatherhood means. The money is hidden in offshore accounts. Rebecca knows the details. Make sure it gets back to the families we hurt. I'm sorry. Not that it matters now. A knock at the door interrupted them. Caitlin stood in the doorway, still in her hospital scrubs. At 27, she carried herself with a guarded professionalism that spoke of hard lessons learned young. The children's group therapy program you sponsored, she said, it's helping. One of my patients finally opened up today about her parents' divorce. Abraham nodded, careful to maintain the professional distance they'd established. That's good to hear. I have some ideas for expanding the program, she continued. If you and Letitia have time to discuss it, maybe over dinner next week? The invitation hung in the air. Another small step toward healing. We'd like that, Letitia answered warmly. After Caitlin left, Abraham stood at his office window, watching her walk to her car. The security lights caught the silver threads in his hair, reflecting in the glass. You never told me what was in Rebecca's final letter, Letitia said quietly. Abraham touched the pocket where it rested. She wrote it to Caitlin, actually, asked me to deliver it when I thought the time was right. And is it? He thought about their cautious reconciliation, the careful steps toward rebuilding trust. Soon, maybe, when she's ready to hear that her mother finally understood the difference between love and possession. In the next room, their grandchildren's laughter mixed with the sound of Connor teaching his twins about heart valves using a toy medical kit. The future of their foundation, their family's legacy of healing, played out in miniature. You know what I learned? Abraham said, turning to his wife. Some betrayals do break you. They shatter everything you thought you knew about love and trust and family. But if you're lucky, if you're blessed, they break you free to build something stronger, something real. Letitia took his hand, her wedding ring catching the light. And the key is knowing the difference? No, he smiled, watching their blended, beautiful family through the door. The key is being brave enough to try again, to believe that truth, even painful truth, is better than comfortable lies. In his desk drawer, one last unopened letter waited. Rebecca's final words to the daughter whose life had been built on lies. Someday, when the foundations of their rebuilt relationship were stronger, Abraham would share it with Caitlin. But for now, they would continue their careful dance of reconciliation, building trust one honest moment at a time. After all, they had learned the hardest way possible that real family isn't about biology or obligation. It's about choice, about forgiveness, about the courage to face truth and the wisdom to know that sometimes the deepest wounds can lead to the most profound healing. Outside, the autumn wind continued to scatter leaves across the hospital grounds, nature's reminder that endings are just beginnings in disguise. Inside the Wilkins Roman home, surrounded by the family they had chosen and the love they had built, Abraham and Letitia held on to their hard-won truth, that betrayal's greatest gift is the freedom to discover what loyalty really means. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comments section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.
Imagine, just picture this scenario. A wealthy but inadequate son barges into your home, your fortress, insisting he's taking your wife for a few nights. How would you react? And to top it off, he starts openly threatening you. My initial impulse was to tackle him and deliver a few punches to his arrogant face, but I opted for a different approach. As I wrapped up loading my tools into my pickup truck that Thursday afternoon, my mood wasn't the best. The client I'd been dealing with for the past fortnight seemed unable to make up his mind about the staircase project, constantly requesting alterations to the original plan. The latest change demanded this morning was so extensive that it necessitated dismantling a significant portion of the work already done. Furthermore, consulting with the architect and engineer was imperative, as accommodating the client's latest whim meant redrawing the structural plans. Consequently, the following day unexpectedly turned into an off day. I'm Kenneth Morrison, the lead artisan and proprietor of a small woodworking carpentry shop specializing in crafting top-tier staircases. My clientele comprises affluent mansion owners, hotels, restaurants, and offices willing to shell out well over $50,000 for a bespoke artistic staircase. At 34, I'd been married to Daphne Tupper, 29, for 4 years. Daphne, a successful lawyer at Kramer, Boylan & Hendricks, a law firm specializing in commercial and intellectual property law. We hadn't yet started a family, primarily because Daphne wanted to establish her career first. Arriving home at 4:30 p.m., I was taken aback to find my wife's car in the driveway. Typically, she worked late on Thursdays to have a shorter day on Fridays. Entering through the back door, my usual path after a day at a construction site, I noticed a slight water pressure problem. It was unusual to find Daphne in the upstairs shower at this time, as she typically showered either in the morning or before bed. After swiftly changing into more comfortable clothes, I made my way upstairs to investigate why my wife was home so early on a Thursday afternoon. As I suspected, Daphne had recently finished showering and was now putting on some enticing black fishnet stockings. A brand new black dress lay on the bed, patiently awaiting its turn to be worn. Hey, honey, why are you home so early? Did I forget something? Do we have plans tonight that slipped my mind? I asked. She looked at me with an expression I hadn't seen before, a hint of nervousness apparent, though she tried to conceal it. Letting out a sigh, she replied, No, Kenneth, you haven't forgotten anything. I'm going out tonight and you're not. I'll be away until Sunday afternoon spending the weekend with Derek Kramer. What? What are you talking about? Is it a business trip or something? I inquired. No, Kenneth, it's not a business trip. Derek has a hotel suite reserved for him and me. I'll be back next week, but this weekend is for him, she said, her tone defiant though her words seemed rehearsed. No, you can't. I don't want my wife spending a weekend with another man. What is this nonsense? I protested. Well, you better accept it, Kenneth, because that's what Derek wants, and I advise you not to cross him. She chuckled. So you're willingly going along with this scheme. You expect me to just accept it, suppress my feelings, and let you go. And then you'll return as my faithful wife after this weekend? I retorted, my words dripping with sarcasm. I never said it's just for this weekend. Derek mentioned he wants it to happen occasionally. So, yes, deal with it and keep quiet. Trust me, your life will be much simpler if you go along with it, she stated firmly. We'll see about that. I won't tolerate this, Daphne. You better think about what you're doing because I won't let that arrogant guy control my life. If you think I'm a pawn you can manipulate without objection, you're in for a rude awakening, I warned. By then, she had finished getting ready for the evening. I went downstairs, grabbed a beer from the fridge, and noticed a Mercedes parking in front of the house. Mr. Smug himself emerged, walked up to the front door, and rang the bell. Kenneth, that's Derek. Will you go answer the door? She yelled from upstairs. I quickly punched in a code on the back door alarm panel, set up my cell phone for video recording, and put it in my t-shirt pocket to capture everything. Then I waited in the living room. I'd known Derek Kramer since Daphne started working for CBH 3 years ago. Our first meeting was at their office Christmas party. Derek, a man in his 40s, radiated a dominant aura. He seemed friendly with his partners and flirtatious with female employees and wives of male employees. However, around his male employees and the husbands of female employees, he was arrogant and disdainful. I took an instant dislike to the guy. Daphne descended the stairs with visible anger and opened the door while I observed from the living room, sipping my beer. She apologized for the delay, expressing uncertainty about her husband's manners, and then whispered something to Derek, though I couldn't discern her words. Derek, upon entering the living room, confronted me about an apparent issue with Daphne spending the weekend with him. His demeanor resembled that of a school principal addressing a disobedient child. Surprised by his audacity to assume authority in my own home, I firmly warned him to leave, my fists clenched. He laughed loudly with Daphne smirking beside him. He dismissed the idea of involving the police, confident they wouldn't intervene. Upon noticing my cell phone recording, he snatched it, attempting to stop the footage. Failing due to the password lock, he angrily threw it onto the ceramic floor, which predictably won the confrontation. He asserted his dominance, declaring that Daphne would spend the weekend with him regardless of my feelings, emphasizing that my opinion was inconsequential. Any attempt to intervene would result in dire consequences, including the exposure of alleged criminal activities. He warned against upsetting Daphne or taking any action that could jeopardize his plans. I decided to act oblivious. It's highly unlikely that such information would become public knowledge. I've never been involved in money laundering or had any association with illegal materials involving children, I replied mechanically. That can be easily arranged. Uploading material to your computer is a simple task. I possess content that could quickly tarnish your reputation. I chose to feign even more ignorance. Illegal materials involving children are, well, illegal. If you upload something like that to my computer, wouldn't that mean you're already in possession of illegal material? I asked innocently. That's the difference between you and me. Some things that are illegal for you are perfectly acceptable for individuals of power like myself who have the right connections. I highly suggest you stick to your working-class antics and refrain from bothering people of higher standing. Do you understand? I could hardly believe what I had just heard. Such dialogue would be excessive, even in a comedy movie. Yet the person in my living room was speaking earnestly. Oh, and one more thing. Please refrain from seeking revenge against me or Daphne. That includes attempting to retaliate by engaging with someone else closely. I want to avoid any potential transmission of infections from you to Daphne and then to me. All right, I won't ask Daphne to withhold lovemaking from you. At least not for now. Can't you see I'm not being unreasonable? Basically, if you cross any boundaries, I'll be aware of it. Okay? Now let's go, honey. They returned to the front door. Daphne grabbed her overnight bag and left without saying goodbye or acknowledging my presence. Honey. He referred to my wife as honey. The entire situation was so surreal that I couldn't summon pure anger. My emotions were a mix of anger and astonishment. At that moment, I silently thanked the burglar who had broken into my house the year before I met Daphne. I was so disturbed that I had a comprehensive surveillance and alarm system installed, complete with motion-activated cameras and voice-activated microphones that could record everything in the house and store it in the cloud. I never let on to Daphne that the system could be set to recording mode while we were at home, ensuring she remained unaware when I activated it just before she opened the front door for that despicable individual. Simultaneously, I had initiated the recording on my cell phone, serving more as a decoy. My hope was that Kramer would notice it and figure out a way to turn it off. This would make him feel less guarded, and he might speak more freely. Thinking he was no longer being filmed, I hoped this could be a valuable source of information for a potential divorce. The scoundrel gave me much more than I expected. The cell phone now scattered on the floor was actually my business cell phone. After dealing with a wealthier clientele, I quickly realized that providing them with my main cell phone meant being on call almost 24/7. A dedicated business cell phone allowed me to turn it off at the end of the day, and I could attend to messages the following morning. So at least I wasn't without a means of communication. I picked up my personal phone and called my business lawyer and best friend Harry. 10 years ago, Harry Davenport became the husband of my elder sister, Jennifer. They enjoyed a blissful marriage until tragedy struck. 4 years into their union, Jennifer tragically drowned during a trip to Guadalupe with her 3 friends. Despite the heartbreaking loss, Harry remained an integral part of our family, earning our love and respect. 3 years after Jennifer's passing, Harry found love again in Christine. They tied the knot after a year of dating, and my parents, Daphne and I, were honored guests at their wedding. To this day, Harry and Christine remain like family to me. Recently, I found myself in a desperate situation and urgently sought Harry's help. After explaining the threats made by someone named Kramer and recounting the events of my wife's private weekend getaway, Harry immediately offered his support. He advised me to stay indoors, avoid contacting anyone, and switch off all communication devices, assuring me that he and Christine would arrive in an hour with dinner. Harry's advice provided much-needed reassurance. Reflecting on the past hour's events, I realized that Daphne, my wife, had been captivated by Kramer's power and charm. I never imagined she would forsake our love for him. It was a harsh realization that our bond wasn't as strong as I thought. My journey with Daphne began 5 years ago at a friend of a friend's birthday party. Despite being unfamiliar with most of the attendees, I struck up a conversation with Daphne, the sister of the birthday boy's army buddy stationed in Afghanistan. Our connection flourished, leading to a week of dating and eventual marriage the following year. During that time, I remained employed by Mr. Duncan, the founder of the small company where I worked. Craig Duncan was highly skilled in woodworking and well-known locally. Despite his expertise in woodworking, his skills in accounting and management were lacking. While still in college, he had hired me as a part-time accountant to handle his bookkeeping. A few months into my role, Mr. Duncan secured 3 substantial contracts that demanded more time than he could spare. Although these projects were challenging, his clients insisted he take them on. Consequently, he asked for my assistance in the field. Initially, my tasks involved running errands, acquiring supplies, and providing support. With handling larger pieces, my rapid learning and aptitude for the work became evident, and after overcoming the initial learning curve, I could independently handle simpler tasks or be a valuable asset on more complex projects. While pursuing my accounting degree, my passion for hands-on work led me to pursue an apprenticeship. After a few years, I earned certification and became Mr. Duncan's associate. Upon his retirement, my parents supported me financially, enabling me to buy out his share over a 2-year period. Despite being viewed as an uneducated shop worker by the lawyers at CBH, my company flourished, focusing on fewer but more lucrative projects. Over the preceding months, I had hired 2 assistants, and my net income and values surpassed those of many lawyers associated with my wife. Despite this success, even my wife was unaware of these details. My contemplation was interrupted by Christine and Harry, who arrived with Chinese takeout and beer. "Are you okay, Kenneth?" Christine asked, offering a warm hug. "I can't believe Daphne did that to you. This is so unlike her," Harry reassured, giving me a supportive hug. "Don't worry, buddy. We'll sort things out. Let's have dinner, and then I'll take a look at your recording." I shared the details of Daphne's unwelcoming reception when I arrived home earlier that afternoon. After dinner, I grabbed my laptop and retrieved the files containing recordings from both the camera and microphone. Fortunately, the conversations were exceptionally clear. "I can't believe what I just heard," Harry exclaimed. "Quite the arrogant guy," I remarked. "No, more like downright foolish," Harry replied. "I mean, this guy is what, 40, 42 years old? That means he has about 15 years of law practice under his belt. He's not a newbie. He's so full of himself that it never occurs to him that sometimes you just need to keep quiet. Your clever trick of making him think he wasn't being recorded after he destroyed your cell phone worked like a charm. He took the bait and spilled everything we need to know." "Okay, but can I legally use it since it was recorded without his consent?" I inquired. "Absolutely. This is your home. You have the right to record whatever you want here," Harry reassured me. "So I have nothing to worry about? Is that what you're saying?" I questioned. "No, that's not what I'm saying. We need to be extremely cautious. I did some research on my way here. Chris was kind enough to drive and handle the takeout. It turns out our guy Kramer is the son of the founder of their law firm. You were aware of this, right?" Harry explained, and I nodded. "What you might not know is that his father, Marvin Kramer, had quite a reputation. He wasn't a great lawyer, but most of the judges in the area were his former college buddies. Knowing everyone personally made it easy for him to win most of his cases. Unfortunately, his son Derek has followed in his footsteps. That's what makes him dangerous. He has a wide network of friendly judges, and if he files a case, getting a judgment in our favor will be extremely challenging, no matter how illegal his actions are." "Wow, so you're saying that no matter what I do, I'm in trouble?" "Not necessarily. Winning will be challenging, but not impossible. I have connections too, you know. The key is to gather enough evidence to make a strong case against him. I've got a plan. But you mentioned that the judges will always side with him," I inquired. "Unless we take the case to criminal court, that's what we'll aim for." Our conversation was interrupted by a knock on the front door. A petite brunette was waiting on the porch. "Hello, Mr. Morrison?" she asked. "Hi, Laura, come on in," Harry called out behind me. "Kenneth, meet Laura Foster. She's the computer specialist at the private investigator firm we collaborate with." I took the liberty of reaching out to her after our earlier call tonight. We briefed Laura on the situation and had her review the recorded conversation, particularly the part where Kramer threatened to upload incriminating material to my computer. Laura paid close attention and then outlined the plan. "All right, there are 2 possible scenarios. Either they come here during the day, likely with your wife's assistance, sit at your computer, change the date and upload their content, making it appear as if it was done before Kramer's visit. If that happens, your camera system will capture everything. Just ensure it's in record mode before you leave for work in the morning." She pulled a small gray box from her bag. "The other option is remote access to your computer for their mischief. I'll install this module upstream of your modem to record anyone attempting to access your router and monitor what they try to upload or download. Take a few minutes to transfer all your personal or sensitive data and files onto a flash drive, then delete everything on your computer. The goal is to prevent them from accessing it." I'll assist with this just to ensure you don't unintentionally leave any hidden data on the computer," Laura explained confidently. It was evident that she was well-versed in her field. "Let's begin, Kenneth. Currently, your only evidence against him for blackmail is a recording. If you attempt legal action with just that, your case might be dismissed swiftly. Public opinion doesn't view blackmail as a very serious crime, and the judges he knows may support him. The ideal scenario would be if Kramer actually uploaded illegal material to your computer and then reported it to the police, alleging he has evidence of you possessing illegal content. In that case, we would have a trail indicating that all of this occurred without your presence at the computer. With the advance warning you received from Kramer, which you recorded, we would have enough evidence to build a robust case against him in criminal court. His judge friends would be less inclined to support him if he's involved in criminal activities, especially those related to illegal materials with children, and they would distance themselves from him." "I find that disturbing and twisted," I remarked. "Yes, but Kramer is just as twisted. One more thing. Can you refrain from using your computer for the next few days? If Kramer proceeds with his plan and reports you, the police inspectors may want to check the computer records to confirm if anyone accessed the illegal files. Post-upload. If you avoid using it, the records will remain clean, which would be more advantageous for us. Also ensure that your cell phone doesn't connect to your home Wi-Fi in the coming days." To prevent them from using your phone instead of your computer, Laura installed the surveillance module and erased all sensitive information, including my company paperwork from both my computer and cell phone. The module will forward us copies of all access requests. "I'll reach out to Harry and you once we have some information. Best of luck, guys," Laura informed us before leaving. "All right, let's get back to more practical matters," Harry suggested. "Kenneth, do you want to start the divorce process now, or do you prefer waiting until Daphne returns to see if things can be resolved?" "No, I want a divorce as soon as possible. I can't stay married to someone easily influenced and corrupted by self-proclaimed powerful men. No hesitation. I want out." "All right then, I'll contact Claudia Milton tomorrow. She's the family law expert at my office. Good, fair, and efficient. I'll ask her to reach out to you ASAP. You'll like her," Harry assured me. We continued discussing matters, and I provided Harry with the access code to my recording system for real-time updates and cloud-stored information. Christine and Harry departed around 11 p.m. I took a Zopiclone and fell asleep within half an hour. At 8:30 the following day, Claudia Milton called me after concluding a conversation with Harry, who had detailed the specifics of my situation. She requested my presence in her office by 11 a.m. During our meeting, Claudia expressed sympathy for my predicament upon learning about Derek Kramer's questionable reputation. She reassured me that since I had purchased the house before meeting Daphne and her name wasn't on the deed, the property remained mine. With no children in the picture, the divorce proceedings would be straightforward. Concerned about my company, I inquired about the possibility of being forced to sell it and divide the proceeds. Claudia summoned Harry to address my concerns, and he promptly assured us, "Don't worry. The marriage contract clearly stipulates that your company is solely yours and she has no claim to it. They might attempt, but I double-checked and legally they have no grounds." I concluded the meeting with Claudia at 12:30, handling financial matters as instructed. She took charge of the situation, assuring me that everything was under control and Daphne would be served the divorce papers at her office on Monday. Later, I replaced my damaged cell phone and spent the remainder of the weekend tending to the yard and catching up on my favorite TV series. Despite my ongoing anger towards Daphne, I struggled to fully comprehend the reality of the situation. While I anticipated mourning the marriage eventually, at that moment, my emotions were still too raw. The thought of Daphne returning home on Sunday loomed, and I debated whether to sleep in the guest room or assign it to her. Ultimately, I decided that it was my house, and she had walked out on me. Refusing to share my bed with her, I relocated all her belongings to the guest room. Subsequently, I purchased a new lockable doorknob and installed it on my bedroom door, keeping the key in my pocket. Upon hearing Derek's car arrive the following evening, I activated the surveillance system to record. I witnessed Daphne engaging in a prolonged French kiss with her boss before exiting the car and waving as he drove away. I was seated in the living room, apparently engrossed in a book, when she entered. "Hi, honey. How was your weekend?" she asked, seeming anxious. Despite her attempt to conceal it, I could tell that she wasn't as composed as she appeared. I refrained from acknowledging her, keeping my focus on my book. "Fine. Continue with your sulking. Derek was spot on when he mentioned you would act this way, suggesting you lack the intelligence to understand my needs or the maturity to accept your shortcomings." She ascended the stairs. As she left, I began counting. 1, 2, 3. "Kenneth Morrison, what's going on? Did you put a lock on our bedroom?" "Correction, on my bedroom," I responded calmly. "All your belongings are in the guest bedroom. You'll be staying there until you find an apartment." "What the hell? Wait until I tell Derek about this. This was not part of the agreement." "Agreement? What agreement? I haven't agreed to any of your partner's nonsense. Either you stay in the guest room or leave. Perhaps Kramer's wife can accommodate you in her marital bed." She glared at me, not uttering a word, stormed into the guest room and slammed the door. I followed her upstairs, yelling through the door. "Speaking of agreements, what was in it for me, by the way?" No response. I returned upstairs. After 15 minutes, my phone began buzzing with text messages from an unfamiliar number. "What's this I hear, cuck? You won't let Daphne into her own room. I thought I explained things clearly to you. Even someone like you should comprehend. For tonight, I'll overlook your childish crisis. Tomorrow, you'll prepare Daphne's favorite dinner and apologize for your behavior. If you behave the rest of the week, I'll permit her to be in bed with you next weekend. Fail to comply and you'll discover my threats are genuine. Follow my instructions. No questions. Clear." I couldn't believe what I was reading. This person bordered on being heartless, delusional, and foolish. I chose not to respond, but took a screenshot of the conversation and sent it to Harry. Harry responded 3 minutes later, saying, "Incredible. This guy thinks he's top-notch, but he's just a first-rate idiot. Keep the conversation intact and don't bother replying to him." Kramer continued to send a couple more acknowledgement requests, to which I remained silent. Eventually, he stopped reaching out. I didn't encounter Daphne again that evening. I went to bed, securing the door and leaving the recording system on. I texted one of my assistants, informing him of my late arrival the following day. I waited until the morning after Daphne had departed before getting up and preparing for the day. While having breakfast, I downloaded the recordings from my system overnight. Daphne hadn't left the guest room until that morning. She had used the guest bathroom for a shower and left without eating breakfast. Surprisingly, she hadn't attempted anything with my computer. As expected, I received a text from Claudia Milton. "Hi, Kenneth. Just confirming that the divorce papers will be served at Tencodor this morning. I informed Harry as well. Have as good a day as possible considering everything." Before heading to the shop, I ensured my home system was still recording and set to send alerts to my phone. If activated, I had an 11 a.m. meeting with the architect to discuss final modifications for my current client. I kept myself busy with minor tasks until the meeting. I anticipated a call from Daphne shortly after being served, but it never came. At 10:45, I messaged Harry, expressing surprise at Daphne's lack of contact. "This means she's talked to Kramer about the divorce papers. They might already be scheming. I'll call Laura. Stay tuned," Harry replied. The meeting proceeded smoothly, allowing me to stay focused, surprisingly. I spent the remainder of the afternoon maintaining my tools and tidying up the shop. At 3:12 p.m., I received an alert on my cell phone. I texted Harry that the show was in motion. He responded with a thumbs up. I accessed my system and watched the live events unfolding in my house. Daphne had returned, accompanied by an unfamiliar man. They entered our home office and activated my computer. Minimal conversation was exchanged between them. The man spent a few minutes decrypting my password, then inserted a flash drive into my computer and engaged in suspicious activities for about 10 minutes. Thankfully, I captured clear images of his face. Meanwhile, Daphne went to the guest room and packed her belongings in garbage bags, as her suitcases were apparently in the master bedroom closet. Once the man completed his tasks, he shut down the computer and informed Daphne of his departure. She finished packing and left the premises. At 3:56 p.m., shortly after the recording ceased, Harry contacted me. "All right, Kenneth. Head home and act normally. I suspect they will involve the police tonight or tomorrow, so be prepared for an inspector's visit. Obtaining a search warrant takes a few hours, so anticipate their arrival tomorrow." "Could I get arrested?" I inquired. "It's a possibility. If it happens, maintain silence. Don't answer any questions. I've already reached out to Stephen Lindsay, a reliable criminal defense lawyer. I've shared all pertinent information, including the recordings. He assures me this will be the easiest case of the year," Harry assured. I provided Harry with the code to control my alarm system recording in case of an arrest. After some more discussion, we concluded our conversation. I felt extremely anxious as I drove home. The evening passed without any police visits, calls from Daphne, or unpleasant messages from Kramer. I made myself a sandwich and ate while watching TV. Although tempted to inform my parents about the situation, I decided to wait until the storm had passed. Explaining computer system tampering and cloud-stored videos to my mother seemed futile and likely to cause unnecessary worry. The next day, while I was at the store, I got another alert saying there was an intruder in my house. Following the same steps as before, I quickly messaged Harry and checked my security system. The police had entered my place and were trying to turn off the alarm. They seemed to have done it successfully because I lost communication. Harry told me he saw what happened and sent the images to Stephen Lindsay. About an hour later, 2 officers came to my shop and arrested me. They handcuffed me and took me away in a police car. They told me my rights and started asking questions, but I chose not to answer. When we got to the station, they took my phone and wallet and put me in a cell with 5 others. There wasn't much talking. Everyone stared at the floor tiles. After about 3 hours, a guard took me to a meeting room to see my lawyer. "What's going on?" I asked the guard. I hadn't told anyone who my lawyer was. The guard didn't say anything and left me alone in the room. 10 minutes later, Derek Kramer walked in. He had a big grin on his face and sat across from me without saying anything. I stared back at him, saying nothing. After he was satisfied with establishing his dominance, he finally spoke. "Now, do you understand the seriousness of the situation?" I stayed quiet. "I asked you a question, Morrison. Answer me, you insignificant bug." Again, I didn't respond. "It's your word against mine, Morrison. A carpenter versus one of the top lawyers in the city. Can you guess what will happen?" he asked, still smirking. Then he got up and left the room. "Okay, it seems like you need some time to process what I've told you. Let's meet again tomorrow morning to discuss further," he said before leaving the room. I was taken back to the cell, now with only 4 others. Later that day, another person came to see me. I was brought back to the same meeting room where a tall blonde man was waiting for me. With a stern expression and a no-nonsense demeanor, he stood up as I entered. "Good afternoon, Kenneth. Nice to meet you. I'm Stephen Lindsay. You can call me Stephen. Harry got in touch with me earlier today saying he had trouble reaching you. Given the situation, we figured you might have been arrested and brought here." I recounted all the events of the day, including the unsettling visit from Derek Kramer. Stephen seemed shocked, but he stayed silent. "Okay, you'll be in front of a judge tomorrow morning. Expect a high bail, but don't worry, Harry will take care of it. I know tonight will be tough, but stay strong. Both Harry and I are here for you. In the meantime, keep refusing to answer their questions. I've officially taken on your case, and I'll make sure Kramer doesn't bother you again." The next day, I appeared before the judge on charges of possessing illegal material involving children, maintaining my plea of not guilty. Bail was set, and I was released later that afternoon. I was restricted from leaving the city or contacting my soon-to-be ex-wife, Derek Kramer, or anyone from their office. But I could work in my shop. My phone and wallet were returned, and Stephen took me for a late lunch where we continued our conversation. I didn't say much at the police station yesterday because I was worried about confidentiality. But after making some calls and doing research, I found out some interesting things about Derek Kramer. Let me give you some reassuring information. Firstly, getting a search warrant takes time, and only after that can they review the found material and get an arrest warrant. In your case, you were brought in before they finished searching your house. Secondly, Despite the restrictions on contacting me or Harry, Derek Kramer was allowed to see you. This strongly suggests that the whole thing was planned, which is definitely illegal. But Harry said Kramer has influence over many judges, I pointed out. Not all of them, he replied with a wink. You can't make so many friends without making some enemies. I have no clue what I'll find at home. I hope my wife and her scheming partner didn't take everything. Don't worry about that. Harry went to your place right after the police left, reactivated the system, and set it to record again. No one came. I went back to the shop to get my car, and then went home for a much-needed shower. The architect had left a message confirming the updated plan had been approved by the client. This was good news, as it meant I could go back to work the next day and keep my mind occupied. When I got home, I found a mess. Every inch had been searched. Besides the tampered computer, I knew they wouldn't find anything incriminating. As I cleaned up, I couldn't help but cry for the first time. Just a week ago, I was a happy man in what I thought was a stable marriage. Now I was a suspect in a crime, facing divorce, and manipulated by my wife's boss. What had I done to deserve this? At least there were no reporters bothering me. They were probably busy with the newly discovered multi-billion-dollar hole in public finances to care about someone like Kenneth. Towards the end of the following week, Stephen finally contacted me with some big news. All charges against me had been dropped. It seemed the assigned inspector, who was particularly sensitive to blackmail issues, wasn't someone to mess with. Despite Derek Kramer's attempts, the inspector swiftly filed charges against him for blackmail, evidence fabrication, and possessing illegal materials with children. As for Daphne, she would be facing conspiracy accusations related to these crimes. Shortly after talking to Stephen, Harry called and invited me to dinner that evening. While on my way to Harry's, Claudia Milton, my family law attorney, reached out to me. Kenneth, Daphne's lawyer, called and said she's ready to sign the divorce papers without changes, but with one condition. She wants a private hour-long meeting with you, suggesting it could be at my office. Although meeting Daphne was the last thing I wanted, I thought it might speed up the divorce process. So I agreed to Claudia's plan. The evening with Harry and Christine was a much-needed break, the first relaxing one in 2 weeks. Christine had prepared a delicious meal of coconut shrimp and rice, which left me feeling peaceful. Upon returning home, the meeting with Daphne was set for the following Wednesday, and despite being the sufferer in this scheme, I couldn't shake off my nerves. When I arrived, Claudia advised me in her office, "Kenneth, I'm not sure about her intentions, but I must warn you, she's facing criminal accusations. Don't give her any ammunition. Be careful of what you say. We can't search her for recording devices, so she might be recording you." "Okay, thanks for the heads up," I replied. Then I was led into a private meeting room where Daphne was already sitting. I expected to encounter the same spiteful and arrogant Daphne I'd known, but she seemed broken. Despite feeling compassionate, memories of her questionable interactions with Kramer quickly dispelled any sympathy I had. "Thank you for meeting with me, Kenneth. After everything, what could you possibly want to say to me?" Her tears began to flow. Daphne expressed regret and apologized to Kenneth for her past behavior, admitting she had been under Derek Kramer's influence. She mentioned feeling awakened upon learning about the dropped charges against Kenneth and the potential accusations they might face. This realization led her to feel deep remorse and shame, especially considering the insignificant nature of the incident. For the next 30 minutes, she continued to reflect on her behavior without asking for any information or probing me further. "I understand. It's over between us, Kenneth. If I were you, I'd seek a divorce too. I don't blame you for ending things. I've quit my job. I made it clear to Derek Kramer I never want to speak to him again. I've gone back to my parents' house and confessed everything. They're furious with me. Let's just say the atmosphere at home is anything but warm and welcoming." I looked at her quietly. Frankly, there was no smart comeback to all of this. She had created her own mess, and now she had to deal with the consequences. The months and maybe even years ahead will be tough for me, Kenneth. I'm not sure what life holds for me. My only hope is that eventually, after everything settles, we might have a chance to be friends. "That's a long shot, Daphne. Very long. We'll see how it goes. Best of luck. I got up and left the room. Part of me still cared for her, but reconciliation was out of the question. Despite wanting revenge initially, circumstances had already made her miserable. She had learned her lesson, and there was no need for more punishment. Daphne made a deal by cooperating fully with authorities against Derek Kramer, which led her to move to another city. After that, I lost contact with her. When allegations against Kramer became public, 2 other men came forward, accusing him of blackmail. Kramer got a 12-year jail term as the police had recordings of all my interactions with him. My testimony wasn't needed. After Kramer was convicted, I sued him and what was left of his firm. And I got a $2 million settlement, with a good chunk going to Harry. Despite pretending to be outraged, I was happy to reward Harry for his invaluable help. My company is doing well, and I'm close to acquiring a specialty door manufacturer, which will improve our operations. With 6 employees who feel like family, I'm content. Harry and Christine invited me to a BBQ a few days after my divorce was finalized. There, I met Christine's younger sister, Kathy, and we hit it off immediately. We've been dating for a few weeks, and we'll see where it leads. Several weeks after settling the case against CBH and Kramer, I visited Kramer in jail, making sure the guard made him stay for our chat. I smirked as he entered, starting with a taunt. "What's up, cuck?" Kramer tried to leave, but the guard made him sit and listen. Ignoring his insults, I casually mentioned, "Oh, interesting preemptive strike. Heard your wife, Jessica, filed for divorce. Maybe I should ask her out for dinner and give her a memorable night." Furious, Kramer snapped, "You rogue, if you do that—" I cut him off. "Save your spit, idiot, I've done that already. Her hummingbird tattoo on her upper left thigh is quite lovely, isn't it, cuck?" He turned beet red. He was about to threaten me again, but then he realized it wouldn't help. Anyway, I wasn't there to talk about Jessica. I just wanted to let him know he's a fool who needs reminders of his own foolishness. Threatening a man in his own home and outlining consequences if he doesn't comply isn't exactly smart, is it? Even a carpenter would see that. "Let's say this time you're the one left in the dust." I laughed while he simmered with anger. "Oh, and didn't you say certain materials were illegal for a simple man like me, but fine for a powerful figure like yourself? Your power amazes me. Perhaps it's the jumpsuit. It suits you." Kramer was so mad he seemed close to a breakdown. "Before I go, I have something Jessica and Daphne thought you might find enlightening." I handed him a folded paper. He unfolded it and looked at it. "What the hell is this?" he asked. "Exactly." I chuckled. "It's a depiction of female gender organ, commonly referred to as a private part." I pointed to a spot on the drawing. "They wanted you to know that's the arousal point."
Before we dive into today's story, please subscribe to Cheating Tales Lab. That would help us a lot. I hope you enjoy the story. Let's begin. Howard Steele's eyes narrowed as he scanned the quarterly reports spread across his desk. The numbers were good, better than good. They were exceptional. Quantum Innovations was poised to dominate the tech market for another year. He allowed himself a small smile of satisfaction. 20 years of ruthless business acumen had built this empire, and he'd be damned if anyone tried to take it from him. The insistent buzzing of his phone cut through his concentration like a bandsaw. Howard glanced down, ready to silence it, when the hospital's number flashed across the screen. A jolt of adrenaline surged through him, primal and electric. "This is Howard Steele," he answered, voice steady despite the sudden hammering of his heart. The nurse's voice was professional calm. It did nothing to quell the rising tide of parental dread. "Mr. Steele, your son Simon has been admitted with injuries. He's asking for you." Howard was already moving, long legs eating up the distance to the elevator. "I'm on my way." The drive to the hospital was a blur of traffic lights and horn blasts. Howard's mind raced through possibilities. A car accident? A bar fight? Simon wasn't the reckless type, but at 19, who knew what trouble he could have stumbled into? The emergency room assaulted his senses, the sharp tang of disinfectant, the cacophony of beeping machines and hushed voices. Howard spotted Simon immediately, hunched on an exam table. His son's usually confident demeanor was gone, replaced by something small and broken. His left arm was in a cast, and bruises were already blooming on his face like dark flowers. "Dad," Simon croaked, his voice raw. Tears welled in his red-rimmed eyes. Howard crossed the room in 3 strides, placing a gentle hand on Simon's uninjured shoulder. "What happened, son?" Simon swallowed hard, Adam's apple bobbing. "I saw Mom with Steve." He paused, the words seemingly stuck in his throat. "In your bedroom." The world tilted sideways for a moment. Howard's grip on Simon's shoulder tightened, though his face remained impassive. He'd built an empire on his ability to mask his emotions, to never show weakness. Now, that skill was being put to its ultimate test. "Tell me everything," he said, voice low and controlled. The story spilled out of Simon in ragged bursts, walking in on Lana and their neighbor, Steve Shelton, tangled together on the bed Howard had shared with his wife for 20 years. The shock, the confusion, the attempt to call his father. Then Steve, all drunken aggression, grappling with Simon, the sickening crack as his arm broke against the doorframe, and Lana helping Steve lock her own son in the guest room before they both fled like thieves in the night. As Simon finished, a maelstrom of emotions raged behind Howard's carefully neutral expression. Betrayal, white-hot and searing. Anger, a slow-burning coal in the pit of his stomach. Concern for his son, the only person who truly mattered now. "I'll handle this," Howard said, squeezing Simon's shoulder. His voice was steel wrapped in velvet. "You're safe now. That's what's important." Simon nodded, some of the tension easing from his frame. He trusted his father implicitly. Howard Steele was a force of nature, a man who made things happen through sheer force of will. If he said he'd handle it, it would be handled. Howard left the hospital with a plan already forming. Also, Howard noticed Simon's injuries were not that serious. It seemed like he over-exaggerated his injuries. Simon might lied, but Howard didn't think about it too much. Right now, all he can think about is confronting Lana and Steve. He drove home, the familiar streets now seeming alien and hostile. The house loomed before him, a monument to 2 decades of lies. Inside, the silence was oppressive. Howard moved through the rooms like a ghost, noting the signs of Lana's hasty departure. Dresser drawers hung open, hangers scattered on the closet floor. In the master bedroom, the sheets were rumpled, reeking of betrayal and cheap cologne. A quick check of his home office confirmed his suspicions. The safe was empty, cleared of cash and crucial documents. Howard's jaw clenched. This wasn't just infidelity. This was theft, acting on instinct honed by years of cutthroat business deals. Howard drove to Steve's house. As he pulled up, he spotted them, Lana and Steve, loading suitcases into Steve's ostentatious sports car. They moved with the easy familiarity of longtime lovers, their betrayal on full display. Cold fury crystallized in Howard's veins. He approached, footsteps measured and deliberate. Going somewhere? His voice cut through the night air like a whip crack. Lana froze, guilt and defiance warring on her face. Steve, never the brightest bulb, tried to puff himself up to look intimidating. He wilted under Howard's arctic glare. "Howard, please," Lana began, her voice tight with panic. "It's not what you think." Howard didn't let her finish. His fist connected with Steve's jaw with a satisfying crunch. The younger man stumbled back, blood trickling from his split lip. "You broke my son's arm," Howard said, his voice eerily calm. "Now I'm going to break you." What followed was a symphony of pure aggression from Howard. Howard's fist rained down on Steve, years of pent-up rage finding release. He barely registered Lana's screams, her attempts to pull him off. When he finally stepped back, Steve was a crumpled heap on the driveway, moaning pitifully. Howard turned to Lana, his eyes cold and hard. "We're done. Don't bother coming home." You've made your choice. As he walked away, he caught snippets of their panicked conversation. Steve, spitting blood. This wasn't part of the plan. We need those files. Lana, hissing back. Shut up, you idiot. He might hear you. Howard's mind whirred into overdrive. Files? Plan? The betrayal ran deeper than he'd imagined. This wasn't just about a failing marriage. This was about his life's work. The next morning found Howard in a private conference room at Quantum Innovations. Across from him sat Frank Harper, the company's legal counsel and Howard's oldest friend. Frank's face was a mask of concern. "Howard, I'm sorry about Lana," Frank began, his voice gruff with emotion. "But something doesn't add up here. Lana's actions, they seem too calculated." Howard nodded, sharing his suspicions about the overheard conversation. As they delved into the intricacies of divorce proceedings, Howard's phone buzzed. An unknown number flashed on the screen, followed by a text message that made his blood run cold. "Back off, or everything you've built will come crashing down." Frank's expression darkened as Howard showed him the message. "Howard, I think we're dealing with something much bigger than infidelity here." "Agreed," Howard said, his voice grim. He revealed the final piece of the puzzle, the emptied safe, the missing documents. "They're after Quantum, Frank. This goes beyond Lana and Steve. Someone's pulling their strings." Frank leaned back, fingers steepled in thought. "We need to move carefully. If word of this gets out, the shareholders will panic. We could be looking at a hostile takeover." Howard's eyes hardened. He'd built Quantum from the ground up, turning a garage startup into a tech giant. He'd be damned if he'd let anyone take it from him. "We fight," he said, voice low and dangerous. "We find out who's behind this, and we bury them." Frank nodded, a grim smile playing at the corners of his mouth. This was the Howard he knew, ruthless, determined, unstoppable when his back was against the wall. "Where do we start?" Frank asked, already reaching for his legal pad. Howard's mind raced, connections forming and plans taking shape. "We need to secure the company first. Lock down all sensitive projects, change access codes. Then we follow the money. Lana's been acting strange for months. There must be a paper trail." As they strategized, Howard felt a familiar fire igniting in his chest. This wasn't just about saving his marriage or his reputation anymore. This was war, and Howard Steele didn't lose wars. "One more thing," Howard said, his voice cold as a Siberian winter. "I want them to suffer, Frank. Lana, Steve, whoever's pulling their strings. I want them to regret the day they crossed me." Frank nodded, no judgment in his eyes. He'd known Howard long enough to understand. This wasn't about vengeance. This was justice, served Steele style. As they delved deeper into their plans, neither man noticed the small device blinking silently under the conference table. Someone was listening, and the game was far from over. Howard Steele's office was a fortress of glass and steel, much like the man himself. He sat behind his imposing desk, fingers steepled, as he faced Ruby Winters. The private investigator's reputation preceded her, discreet, thorough, and utterly ruthless. Just the kind of ally Howard needed in this war. "I need everything on Steve Shelton and my soon-to-be ex-wife, Lana," Howard said, his voice as cold and sharp as a scalpel. "Leave no stone unturned." Ruby nodded, her eyes glinting with professional interest. "Consider it done, Mr. Steele. Anything specific you're looking for?" "Anything that doesn't add up," Howard replied. "I have a feeling this goes deeper than a simple affair." As Ruby left to begin her investigation, Howard turned his attention to the financial reports spread across his desk. The numbers blurred before his eyes, his mind replaying the events of the past few days. The betrayal, Simon's injuries, the confrontation with Lana and Steve. Each memory stoked the cold fury burning in his chest. A knock at the door interrupted his dark musings. Lawrence Stanley, Howard's business partner and COO of Quantum Innovations, entered with a grim expression. "Howard, we need to talk," Lawrence said, his normally jovial face etched with concern. There are some financial discrepancies I can't explain. Howard's eyes narrowed. Show me. As Lawrence laid out the troubling figures, Howard's suspicions crystallized into certainty. This wasn't just about Lana's infidelity. This was corporate espionage, a coordinated attack on everything he'd built. Lock it down, Howard ordered, his voice leaving no room for argument. Change all access codes. Restrict information flow. I want to know every person who's accessed our systems in the last 6 months. Lawrence nodded, already reaching for his phone. What about the board? They'll want answers. They'll get them when I'm ready, Howard replied. For now, this stays between us. As Lawrence left to implement the security measures, Howard's phone buzzed. A text from Ruby. Found something. Meet me at your house. Alone. The drive home was a blur of strategic planning and barely contained rage. Howard pulled into his driveway, noting the unfamiliar car parked across the street. Ruby's, no doubt. He found her in his home office, her expression grim. You're not going to like this, Mrs. Steele. I already don't like any of this, Howard retorted. What did you find? Ruby held up a tiny device, no larger than a button. This was hidden in your desk lamp. High-end stuff, live audio feed. There are probably more scattered throughout the house. Howard's blood ran cold, then hot with fury. They'd been watching him, listening to his every move, in his own home. There's more, Ruby continued. Steve Shelton? He's got priors for fraud, suspected ties to organized crime. And your wife. She's been making large cash withdrawals from your joint account for months, you might know that. Hundreds of thousands of dollars. Howard's mind raced, connecting the dots. The missing documents from his safe, the financial discrepancies at Quantum, the surveillance. This was no impulsive affair. This was a calculated attack. What about Simon? Howard asked, a rare note of concern creeping into his voice. Ruby's expression softened slightly. Your son's clean, far as I can tell, but he might know more than he's letting on. Kids notice things, even if they don't understand what they're seeing. Howard nodded, already formulating his next move. Keep digging. I want to know every skeleton in their closets, every dirty secret, and sweep the house for more bugs. As Ruby left to continue her investigation, Howard sank into his office chair. The leather creaked, a familiar sound in a world that had suddenly become alien and hostile. His phone buzzed again. Another text from the unknown number. Tick-tock, Howard. How much are you willing to lose? Howard's grip tightened on the phone, his knuckles white. They thought they had him cornered, outmaneuvered. They had no idea who they were dealing with. A knock at the door startled him from his thoughts. Simon stood in the doorway, his broken arm in a sling, his face a mask of guilt and fear. Dad, he said, his voice barely above a whisper. I think I knew something was wrong with Mom. I should have said something sooner. Howard's expression softened, just a fraction. Comein, son, tell me everything. As Simon poured out his observations. Hushed phone calls, mysterious meetings, Lana's sudden interest in Howard's work projects. Howard felt a grim satisfaction. His son was observant, sharp, a true steel. You did the right thing by telling me now, Howard said, squeezing Simon's uninjured shoulder. We'll handle this. Together. Simon nodded, some of the tension leaving his frame. He trusted his father implicitly, knew that Howard Steele was a force to be reckoned with. As Simon left, Howard's resolve hardened. Lana and Steve had made a critical error. They'd threatened not just his business, but his family, and Howard Steele protected what was his. He picked up his phone, dialing Lawrence. Meet me at the office. It's time to go on the offensive. The next few days were a whirlwind of activity. Howard and Lawrence worked tirelessly, setting up firewalls, tracking data access, laying traps for their unseen enemies. Ruby's investigation continued to uncover layers of deception and betrayal. It was late one night when everything came to a head. Howard was driving home, his mind churning with plans and countermoves, when he noticed something off about his car's handling. The brakes felt spongy, unresponsive. With a surge of adrenaline, Howard realized what was happening. He'd driven this road 1,000 times, knew every curve and dip. He managed to guide the car off the road, narrowly avoiding a catastrophic crash. As he stood by the roadside, waiting for a tow truck, Howard's phone buzzed. The unknown number again. Next time, you won't be so lucky. A cold smile spread across Howard's face. They'd just made their final mistake. Now, it was his turn to strike. The next morning found Howard in his office, facing Lawrence and Ruby. The atmosphere was tense, charged with anticipation. They tried to kill me last night, Howard said without preamble. Tampered with my brakes. Lawrence's face paled, but Ruby merely nodded, as if confirming a suspicion. So, what's our play? Lawrence asked, his voice steady despite the shock. Howard's eyes glinted with a predatory light. We set a trap, feed them false information about a major deal, something too tempting to resist. Ruby leaned forward, intrigued. What kind of deal? A merger, Howard replied. One that would triple Quantum's value overnight. The kind of inside information that could make someone very, very rich. They'll definitely come to steal, and we'll catch them red-handed. As they hammered out the details of their plan, Howard felt a familiar rush of adrenaline. The game was entering its final stages, and he intended to emerge victorious. Lana, Steve, and whoever was pulling their strings had no idea what they'd unleashed. Howard Steele was coming for them, and he would show no mercy. Howard Steele's office hummed with tension, the air thick with anticipation. He stood at the window, gazing out at the city skyline, a predatory gleam in his eyes. Behind him, Lawrence and Ruby waited, their faces grim with determination. It's time, Howard said, turning to face his allies. Let's spring the trap. The plan was elegant in its simplicity. They had leaked information about a major cash transaction happening at Howard's house. Bait too tempting for Lana and Steve to resist. Now, all that remained was to wait. As night fell, Howard's expansive home transformed into a high-tech command center. Hidden cameras covered every angle. Microphones picked up the slightest whisper. In a room upstairs, Lawrence monitored the feeds, ready to signal at the first sign of intrusion. Howard paced the living room, every muscle coiled tight. This was more than just catching thieves. This was about retribution, about making Lana and Steve pay for their betrayal. A soft beep from Howard's earpiece broke the silence. Lawrence's voice came through, tense but controlled. Movement at the back gate. 2 figures, approaching the house. Howard's lips curled into a cold smile. Right on schedule. He moved silently through the darkened house, positioning himself in the shadows of his study. Minutes ticked by, each second stretching into eternity. Then, a soft click, the unmistakable sound of a lock being picked. Howard's hand tightened on the grip of the firearm concealed in his jacket, not out of fear, but anticipation. The study door eased open. 2 silhouettes slipped inside, one tall and bulky, the other slender and graceful. Steve and Lana, moving with the practiced ease of experienced burglars. Howard waited, letting them move deeper into the room. He saw Steve head for the safe hidden behind a painting, while Lana made straight for the computer. Looking for something? Howard's voice cut through the darkness like a whip crack. The intruders froze. In one fluid motion, Howard flicked on the lights and leveled his firearm at them. Lana's face drained of color. Howard, please. Save it. Howard snarled. I know everything. Your plans, the embezzlement, the frame job you had planned. Did you really think you could outsmart me? Steve, his face still bruised from their last encounter, lunged for something in his jacket. Howard's finger tightened on the trigger, but before he could fire, another figure burst into the room. Don't move. Simon's voice rang out, strong and clear. Howard allowed himself a moment of pride. His son stood tall, his own firearm trained steadily on Steve. The cast on his arm was gone, It had never been real, just another part of their elaborate ruse. Steve's eyes darted between father and son, realizing he was outmatched. Slowly, he raised his hands. Lana, her composure cracking, turned to Simon. "Baby, please. You don't understand." "I understand perfectly." Simon cut her off, his voice cold. "I understood when I caught you with Steve. I understood when you helped him lock me in that room. And I understand now, watching you try to steal from us." The look of betrayal on Lana's face was almost comical. She had never suspected that her son, the one she thought she had fooled, had been playing her all along. Howard stepped forward, his firearm never wavering. "It's over. The police are on their way. But before they get here, I want answers. Who are you working for?" Steve's face twisted into a sneer. "You think this ends with us? We're just the tip of the iceberg, Steele. There are people out there who want to see you burn, and they won't stop." His words cut off in a gasp as Simon, moving with lightning speed, drove his fist into Steve's stomach. "Answer the question," Simon growled. But before Steve could speak, Lana made her move. With a desperate cry, she lunged for Howard's firearm. Time seemed to slow. Howard saw the wild look in Lana's eyes, saw her fingers reaching for the weapon. In that split second, he made his choice. The shot echoed through the room like a thunderclap. Lana stumbled back, clutching her shoulder. Blood seeped between her fingers, staining her designer blouse crimson. "Dad!" Simon's voice was sharp with shock. Howard's face was a mask of cold fury. She made her choice. The sound of sirens filled the air, growing louder by the second. Steve, seeing his last chance slipping away, made a desperate grab for Lana's purse. But Simon was faster, tackling him to the ground just as the police burst through the door. What followed was a blur of activity. Paramedics tending to Lana, police securing Steve, detectives taking statements. Through it all, Howard stood like a rock, his eyes never leaving Lana and Steve as they were led away in handcuffs. As the chaos subsided, Simon approached his father. "It's really over?" Howard nodded, allowing himself to relax for the first time in weeks. "It's over. You did good, son." Simon's smile was tinged with sadness. I wish it hadn't come to this." Howard placed a hand on his son's shoulder, his grip firm and reassuring. They made their choices. Now they faced the consequences. As dawn broke over the city, Howard stood in his study, surveying the aftermath of the night's events. Lawrence and Ruby joined him, their faces showing a mixture of relief and grim satisfaction. "The board's going to want answers," Lawrence said. Howard nodded. "They'll get them. Every dirty detail. It's time to clean house, root out any other moles in the company." Ruby handed him a thick file. "This should help. Everything I uncovered about their operation, including some names you'll want to look into." Howard took the file, his mind already racing with plans. This wasn't just about saving his company anymore. This was about sending a message. No one crossed Howard Steele and got away with it. Months passed. The trial was a media sensation. Every sordid detail splashed across headlines. Howard took the stand, his testimony a masterclass in controlled fury. He laid out the extent of Lana and Steve's betrayal, backed by mountains of evidence. As the verdict was read guilty on all counts, Howard felt no joy, no satisfaction, only a grim sense of justice served. In the aftermath, quantum innovations emerged stronger than ever. The board, impressed by Howard's handling of the crisis, granted him even more control. New security measures were implemented, turning the company into a digital fortress. Simon, having proven his mettle, took on a larger role in the company. Father and son worked side by side, rebuilding what had been threatened, creating something even more powerful. One evening, as they stood in Howard's office overlooking the city, Simon turned to his father. "Do you ever regret how things turned out? With Mom, I mean." Howard's gaze remained fixed on the skyline, his expression unreadable. "Regret is a luxury we can't afford, Simon. She made her choices. We made ours. All that matters now is moving forward. Simon nodded, understanding the harsh truth in his father's words. They had weathered a storm of betrayal and corporate intrigue, emerging not just victorious, but stronger. The Steele legacy would continue, forged in fire, tempered by adversity. As night fell over the city, Howard Steele allowed himself a small smile. He had faced down his enemies, protected what was his, and come out on top. And if anyone else dared to challenge him, well, they would learn the hard way that crossing Howard Steele was a mistake they would regret for the rest of their lives. This is where our story comes to an end. Share your thoughts in the comment section. Thanks for your time. If you enjoy this story, please subscribe to this channel. Click on the video you see on the screen, and I will see you there.